Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the August 16th, 2003 Advisory Commission on Special Education meeting. We are grateful for all of your interest and time and effort to be here this morning. With that, we will begin with a roll call.
Commissioner Tostin?
Present.
Commissioner Graff? Commissioner Estes? Commissioner Hamilton?
Present.
Commissioner Liu? Commissioner Lopez?
Present.
Commissioner Michad?
Present.
Commissioner Notch?
Present.
Commissioner Oyakawa?
Here.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Here.
Commissioner Snipes?
Yes, can I speak to Juan? I was just on the phone with him.
Okay. Commissioner Sorter?
Present.
Ava?
Commissioner Tapa Allen? Sorry. Topalian? And Commissioner Wilkins?
Present.
Hello? This is April Lopez Dominguez. I just told Juan we were not going to use the enterprise card today, but it's back on.
Commissioner Lopez, can you please mute your feed? Thank you.
So sorry.
And I just want to acknowledge Commissioner Lopez is present, as well as acknowledging that Commissioner Liu is also present but needed to step out the room momentarily and will return. With that, let's move into our Pledge of Allegiance, led by Commissioner Topalian. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, communications, and we're moving into communications and announcements. And I'd like to just make a general announcement. All of us have probably been in a special ed environment, and one of the core principles of special education, flexibility and roll with it. And so whatever's happening, we will get through it. We are relying obviously on technology, and this is a hybrid meeting. A number of our commissioners, in order to participate, needed to rely on our flexibility with technology today. And I'm just going to pause because we have an echo in the room. Testing there. And so we will be working through that in the meeting. An announcement, we will also be joining the recipients of the Gold Award winners for a lunch that is sponsored by our partners of the State SELPA Association, and so I want to acknowledge that on the front end, as it may require us to adjust our lunch, or I want to make sure everyone has adjusted their lunch plans appropriately. And the reminder to please speak slower as we are communicating and relying on our interpreter friends. And so for those of us on the dais, please ensure all your devices are muted or set to stun. With that, we will move into a review of the agenda. Item 1, a presentation from the Supporting Inclusive Practices project that will focus on identifying barriers and shifting mindsets as a necessary step for inclusive practices. Absolutely. Testing. Is this?
Can you please turn up the volume in the control room a little bit on the mics? Thank you.
Item 2, we will be recognizing the San Bernardino Unified School District and SELPA as the recipients of our Gold Award for their Dyslexia Matters program. Immediately following that presentation, we will transition to lunch. At the conclusion of lunch, we will move into item 3, a presentation from our partners at the Department of Education related to the English Language Proficiency Assessments for California and updates that have been made to that assessment. Item 4, we will have an update regarding the system improvement leads or system of support leads related to special education. Item 5, we will have a presentation from the Government Affairs Division sharing with us information about the various roles in the governance structure of our state. Item 6 will be a conversation led by the Policy and Ledge Committee updating us on the development of our strategic plan. We will close the day with public comments in item 7 and conclude the meeting after public comments. With that, I would ask if you could please share the slide with the instructions for the public to provide public comment. Members of the public who wish to make comments may make comments on particular agenda items. The slide are for those who are participating via conference call or via web. We would ask that you, as you dial in, please identify your name and the organization you may be representing. Please note that public comments are limited to 2 minutes. For members of the public in the room wishing to make public comment, we ask that you please line up behind the dais and we will take public comment in the order that folks walk up. Okay. Thank you. And so as we move into our meeting agenda, as we were planning this meeting, Vice Chair Groff and I talked about needing to frame our work this year. And if you remember, at the conclusion of last year, and as we're developing our strategic plan, we recognized the transformative investments that our state has made and that our educational leaders at the department, as well as the legislature and the governor, have made in improving outcomes for students with disabilities, and beyond improving outcomes, transforming the environments that we work in and that we connect with our families and students. And very fortunate that the governor and the first partner yesterday released or shared their California's Family Agenda for Education. I just wanted to take a moment and share the 4 components. The freedom to decide. All parents deserve to share in key school decisions. The freedom to thrive. All students deserve a fair start in life. The freedom to learn. All students deserve to learn about the world and themselves. And lastly, the freedom to succeed. All students deserve to build real-life skills and career. And so I'd ask everyone, take a moment and envision what that might look like for the students you're serving, your children, the educators that you work with. What might environments that lead to freedom or educational freedom look like? Just take a moment and envision that. Whatever you are envisioning, that picture, I want to encourage everyone to hold on to. Let's keep that source of inspiration. And our individual visions, based on our roles here, will become our shared vision for what educational freedom looks like for the student population that we're serving. It is going to take lots of effort and lots of time, and certainly all of our voices. And so when we begin to think about how we are going to move from where we are to the world that we envision, we're very pleased to begin our conversation with our partners from the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We'll be having a conversation around some of the first steps that we can begin implementing to move to the world that we envision for our students, how we begin to shift our mindsets and move beyond the inspiration and the ideals to systems transformation that will benefit everyone. And so with that, I'm very pleased to welcome our partners from the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project to begin their presentation with us. Dr. Brooks, welcome, and thank you as always.
How's that? All right, thank you so much. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We are absolutely honored to be here today and share with you some of the work that we share across the state with the grantees we serve. I'll talk a little bit about the project, but what I want to direct your attention to first before we introduce the rest of the team, these slides are very intentional that we're sharing with you. We select the photos to be, again, very intentional by design. If you look at the photo on the left, it's a picture of adults surrounding a table with their computers out, working collaboratively together. That's us. These are the adults behind the scenes doing the work to make the best decisions for our students in the system and those that we serve. The picture on the left, those are the decisions that are being made for those, again, in the system, in the trenches. So just want to be very mindful of when our team comes together, when you, I'm sure, as commissioners come together and you make these decisions and use, become good stewards of public funds and push up policy, that we are doing this in the best interest of kids. And we often say, if we're not talking about students at the center, we're having the wrong conversation. So I'd like to introduce a couple more members of our team.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Dan Daher. I am a project coordinator for Supporting Inclusive Practices, and I am based out of the Riverside County Office of Education. Thank you for having us. Pleasure to be here.
And Celise is actually working with one of our grantees right now, coming down from Kingsburg, so she's right where she needs to be and apologizes, sends her best wishes, but we are very grateful that she has been able to be a part of their kickoff for the school year, so she sends her best.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Juliette Inyanuo, and I'm a Program Support Specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of El Dorado County Office of Education.
So many of you may be familiar with our project, but just a little bit of background. We are a technical assistance project funded by the California Department of Education. We operate out of 2 county offices, El Dorado in the north and Riverside in the south. And our small but mighty team joins forces and is truly, we are boots on the ground, working with now upwards of 100 individual districts, county offices of education, and special education local plan areas in the name of equity and inclusion. We focus primarily on the state performance plan indicators 3, 5, 6, and 7 around least restrictive environment and achievement for students with disabilities. But when we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about all kids in all spaces and places, and really lifting up equitable systems for all of our students to do what Commissioner Tostin mentioned in terms of thriving and really having the best opportunities for all and engaging our families along the way. So please feel free to look at our website. Everything we do is at no cost to our members throughout the state, whether that's in-person, virtual events, thought partnering, and then again, that direct technical assistance for those 100 school communities at large. We also support the Department of Education on several state committees and really just want to be in there and roll up our sleeves in any way we can for our students throughout California. So our mission is to provide unparalleled statewide technical assistance. We don't want to just keep perpetuating an old system that we know is not working for our students. So we really strive to be innovative and dig in deep at the local level. We know that when we work with one large district, that doesn't mean that each school is going to need the same approach. They may have the same goal, but flexible means to get there in terms of moving the system for our students, to be equitable and inclusive, and really focusing on an environment of belonging and meaningful inclusion, and not just moving students into spaces to increase our LRE or our least restrictive environment numbers, but true meaningful inclusion and what is the lived experience of the students, of their families, families, of the staff, again, everyone whom we serve in the system. So our vision is, again, intentionally designed, and sometimes that means redesign. Sometimes we have something in place, and we're just not getting the outcomes that we intended, and that's okay to go back and redesign. We don't want to sit in a system where we say, well, this is what we have, so this is what we do. We really want to break that down if we're not, again, getting the outcomes for our students. And to be equitable and inclusive. So our tagline in SIP is Innovate, Include, Impact. So this presentation is a little bit different for you all because what we wanted to share is a sample of what we share out with our grantees. So we're presenting it from a different lens, where we will present it as this is what we often pose to districts, this is how we address these issues, and we always start with grounding in language so that when we're talking about equitable education or inclusion, we're talking about the same things, right? We have a foundation and a context that is shared across the board. So this whole presentation, as Commissioner Tosta mentioned, is around mindsets and culture and a culture of inclusion. We have surveyed thousands upon thousands of educators and families and students and asked, what is the biggest barrier to inclusion? And every time the response comes back, mindset. You know, you think it would be, especially in these times, it's the pandemic's been a barrier, it's funding, it's facilities, it's staffing. All of those things are always challenging. But the number one barrier has been mindset. And so the question that our team has been asking each other the last few years is, how do we shift the mindset? Instead of just, asking for students to be included, right? We're beyond asking permission. It's a civil right. But it is hard to change mindsets when we teach the way we taught. We're in a system that was designed before we got there. And so we've been working with a company called Culture Partners for the last few years. They work with Fortune 500 companies all over the world. And the question we asked was, how do things move in corporate culture so much more quickly, it seems, than in education? And what can we maybe glean from that we can apply framework-wise to change our systems? And so we wanted to pull some information from them and learn a little bit alongside them in terms of the frameworks and the tools that they've been using, Fortune 500 companies and abroad. So back to our presentation. Again, this is us sharing with you what we share with grantees, so you get a taste of what this looks like boots on the ground. So grounding us back in language around eliminating educational barriers, not just going around them, not just pretending they're not there, but truly eliminating them, providing equal opportunity and with the same rigorous standards. We use this definition, and this is an ode to Kevin Schaefer, a co-director, because he says this so much more eloquently than I can. But we use this definition from 1997 because it is still an aim today. 26 years later, we're still striving to operationalize this definition. So hopefully we'll get there soon. Because, is this still on? Because it's not just for compliance. Yes, I think this is cutting in and out. Are we good now? Is that good? Awesome. So it's not just for compliance. Compliance will always be there. We will always have benchmarks. We will always have targets. We will always have goals. And we're on this continuous improvement process and journey. So compliance is there. But it has to be more than just compliance. There has to be a moral imperative. And the balance must weigh more strongly on the side of moral imperative than it does for compliance. As heavy as that hammer feels sometimes, once we can dig into the culture of inclusion and really look at what's best for students, regardless of our current situation, we see the system move more fluidly, more quickly. I'm going to pass it off.
So when we work with our grantees to create this more inclusive and equitable educational system and lean into this moral imperative that Kristen just talked about, we try to emphasize a few things. First being how and why the educational system was designed, who it was designed to benefit, and the consequences today for all of our students. And in many instances, the redesign of this system really requires us to unlearn some practices, shift some mindsets, and remove some of the barriers that exist for the most marginalized students. And so when we dig into this work with our grantees, we continuously ask, who is being excluded? And so I'm going to give you a quick history lesson. So back during the Industrial Revolution, there were two schools of thoughts about how to produce the best worker, the best student. On one side of the fence, we have humanism. And this school of thought believed that we needed to produce more poets, more musicians, and more artists. But on the other side of the fence, Taylorism, they pushed for more standardization, efficiency, being right, being timely. And so when it came to education, we ultimately moved or placed more emphasis on something called Taylorism. And as a result, our schools and factories looked very similar, hence the term factory model of education. And so one example of the standardized way to develop and test our students was the multiplication facts, and we're all familiar with that. This was a timed assessment. It's how fast can you solve the problem, but what if you couldn't solve all the problems in the time allotted? You kept trying and trying. And oftentimes as you're trying, the rest of the class moved on. But what if you still can't do it? Oftentimes you had to sit off to the side and you had to get help for potentially an aid. But what are we really testing here? Is it a true understanding of multiplication facts, or is it speed? How fast, how timely, how accurate our students can be. And so this is a visual of our factories and what our schools looked like during the industrialized revolution. And so as you can see, there's some similarities. Students and factory workers are all sitting the same or standing in a row. They have similar posture in the classroom and also in the factory. The teacher or the boss is sitting in the back, watching over, having control and authority over that space. And so the goal here was to educate students and prepare them for employment in factories. So the classroom mirrored what students would see in a factory, and students were taught to obey, follow instructions, sit up straight. They were taught basic math facts, basic rote skills. So the focus of education in the early 19th century was just teaching students basic skills such as sitting still, being right, the teacher being that expert, and the student being a depository of knowledge. But our curriculum has evolved, and it's morphed into something more competency-based model, where now the emphasis is placed on perseverance, creativity, and collaboration. So our curriculum has evolved, but some of our practices and expectations for students just unfortunately have not. And so in our work with grantees, we emphasize three things. All students should have the power to make choices in their learning. All kids, including those that are with the most significant challenges, deserve the right to be educated and to be taught with 21st century competencies. When children are excluded and not provided these opportunities, then we as adults are creating an opportunity gap for them. And so hence why inclusion is so imperative. We remind our grantees in the work that we do that inclusion is not a student readiness model. The students are ready. They were born to be included. And as educators and leaders within our field, we have a great deal of power, every single one of us, no matter where we sit in the system, to create more inclusive learning opportunities for all of our students. And so instead of trying to fit students into a box, much like the Industrial Revolution, where each student went into the schoolhouse with their unique identities and all came out looking the same, we need to aim for a system that celebrates their unique identities and the variability of each and every single learner that comes through our doors. And so in the work that we do with our grantees, one of our entry points is the research. We try to ground ourselves in research and in data. And so the research that supports inclusion. And so the research on the slide really calls out the adverse effects of self-contained settings on our students, but it also highlights the importance of providing inclusive educational environments, because this is where we see authentic integration and interactions between peers. This is where we truly are able to have a positive impact on every single student and their future. And when implemented effectively and with fidelity, inclusive education leads to academic and social benefits for all of our students. It also provides enhanced chances for learning and specialized instruction, and it also fosters an acceptance of individual differences while also developing the sense of belonging that we talk about within the school community.
So, sorry about that. So again, when presenting our grantees with some of the research, we tend to focus less on the content of the research or the findings of the research, and really draw attention to things like the date of the research and how long this research has been standing, how long this type of research has been going on. And over time, the findings remain consistent, that including all students and providing opportunity for all students is really what is best for all students, right? That excluding some really continues to support a system that was designed to exclude them in the first place. And so how do we push back on that, right? We also point to the depth and the breadth of the studies, right? Whether we are discussing instructional practices, educational outcomes, health outcomes, life expectancy outcomes. In this case, you'll see that we highlight the fact that one study was a meta-analysis of over 4 million subjects, students, right? And the outcomes continue to be the same, right? The research for decades has informed us that including all learners really is what is best for all kids. And so again, when we are out there, we note the definition, the grounding definition that we use from 1997. We note that there's research from the early 2000s and even before then. And we note that even now, as recently as 2023, the year that we're in, again, a research of 24,000 records shows the academic improvement of that students experience when they are included with their neurotypical peers, or however we want to frame that. And so we really, once we've grounded ourselves in language, really kind of brought to light the moral imperative over the compliance component that's always going to be there, and then brought to light some research that's been going on. We really give them share with them our blueprint for inclusion. The nice thing about this is, well, the way it has evolved from more of a linear trajectory or linear journey to more of a process or a circular kind of ongoing process. And we really try to build confidence that this can be done. We try to instill the idea that they are not alone in trying to do this. And so we will help with the process. We can help with connecting them to like-minded colleagues in districts, similar districts working on the same things. And that there is never there's always an opportunity to remain in the blueprint, right? Like, as long as our culture is moving forward and producing a culture of inclusion, that we can be envisioning and building and implementing simultaneously in different facets of our plan, of our program. And so when we start digging deep, really what we're talking about, again, is this mindset thing, right? We're challenging the mindset and the knowledge of what research has told us. We're challenging the compliance piece and making it more about a moral imperative and just what is right for kids. And so we are challenging all these mindsets. And the way we do that, again, as Dr. Brooks mentioned, was our work with culture partners. And the work that Connors and Smith did a little over a decade ago suggests that we all have our lived experiences. Our students have their lived experiences. Those experiences form our beliefs. So right now, you are having an experience, and this experience is shaping your beliefs about me, about our project, about my colleagues. Just the whole experience does that. What ends up happening is we act as adults, as human beings, we act in accordance with our beliefs. If we believe something is scary, we avoid that. If we believe something is safe, we tend to go to it, even as children, right? And then those actions lead us to get the results we're getting. Intended, unintended, desired, less than desired, etc. And so what we've typically done in education is whenever we are not getting the results we're looking for, what do? We create another plan. We do something different. We add to people's plates. But what we've failed to do is really address the root cause of this model, and that it's our culture, right? The beliefs, the underlying beliefs and the mindsets that are leading these actions or driving these actions in the first place. So I'd like to invite you to reflect with us, okay? And think of something that you must deliver, something that you're looking to deliver, a result you are looking for. And by the way, this can be in your personal life, this could be in your private, professional life, this can be in a wide variety of settings. It holds true, okay? So if you were to reflect on something that in your personal life or your professional life that you must deliver, some result you were trying to get and still working towards, right? Where what we would do, or what we do when we work with grantees, is instead of saying, what can you do differently, right? Our question is, what are the beliefs that are either hindering or accelerating you towards these results? What beliefs are getting in the way of you not achieving these results, right? And it could be a variety, right? I don't believe that I can. I don't believe I know how. I don't believe I have the means, whatever those beliefs might be, right? And then we start working with our grantees as organizationally, right? To start to really pinpoint those beliefs that they think are going to get them the most bang for the buck if they were to challenge those previously held beliefs, right? So I invite you to do the same. What might those beliefs be that are impeding your organization or your professional or personal goals from being achieved, right? And we really start to pinpoint those beliefs. And then we come to this idea of the experiences, again, going below just the actions. We can all put together a plan. We've all seen strategic plans, and then they get revamped and redone and stuff like that. But what experiences can we create for those we serve, for our students, for our teachers, for our leaders, that is going to start to shift the beliefs that are getting in the way of achieving our results? So in the case of what we do, we are looking for inclusive systems. We're looking to reshape and rebuild and sometimes re-envision what those current systems are to make them a little more inclusive. And we can do all kinds of things, but if we don't believe in the purpose, if we don't believe in the value, if we don't believe that there is a better version of ourselves that we can provide to our students, we are not going to do that work. And there's a reason we may not believe those things. And so what experiences might we be able to create to start to shift your beliefs or the organizational beliefs around doing the work, right? Because now I can go and do the same things I've been doing, but now there's a renewed sense of belief in them, and the outcomes might be different. Okay.
So how do we do that is the question, right? Kind of the so what, now what? So we'll often work with our grantees and they'll say, okay, you've given us the history, the data, the research, what our current state is. We've talked about what our desired state is. How are we going to get there? How do we shape these beliefs to have, and how do we offer new experiences, engage and have new authentic experiences over time? Not just one and done opportunities. We have a lot of back to school activities happening right now, a lot of retreats, a lot of one-day kickoffs, and those are great and those are good for reminding us what our outcomes are, where we're headed, what we need to do better and differently for students, but it has to be a continual experience that we're in this journey together. So oftentimes when we're working with our grantees, we tell stories. We know out of a research study out of Stanford that stories are 22 times more powerful than data alone. So we like to partner not only our shared language and our research practices and evidence-based practices, but also the storytelling of really what's going on out in the field and how we can start to shift our thinking and shift our perspectives. So what I'd like to share with you now is a video from Simon Sinek that we often share with our grantees. It's a 2-minute video, so it's very brief. With this slide deck, I'm going to exit out of this slide deck and open up in another screen, so just letting our interpreters know that I'm going to switch in the tech for just a moment.
A few months ago, I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful hotel. And the reason it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can go and buy a fancy bed. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. If you walk past somebody at the Four Seasons and they say hello to you, you get the feeling that they actually wanted to say hello to you. It's not that somebody told them that you have to say hello to all the customers, say hello to all the guests, right? You actually feel that they care. Now, in their lobby, they have a coffee stand. And one afternoon, I went to buy a cup of coffee, and there was a barista by the name of Noah who was serving me. Noah was fantastic. He was friendly and fun, and he was engaging with me, and I had so much fun buying a cup of coffee, I actually think I gave 100% tip, right? He was wonderful. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah says, I love my job. And so I followed up. I said, what is it that the Four Seasons is doing that would make you say to me, I love my job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, if there's anything that I need to do my job better. He said, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said something magical. He says, I also work at Caesar's Palace. And at Caesar's Palace, the managers are trying to make sure we're doing everything right. They catch us when we do things wrong. He says, when I go to work there, I like to keep my head under the radar and just get through the day so I can get my paycheck. He says, here at the Four Seasons, I feel I can be myself. Same person, entirely different experience from the customer who will engage with Noah. So we in leadership are always criticizing the people. We're always saying, we've got to get the right people on the bus. I've got to fill my team. I've got to get the right people. But the reality is, it's not the people. It's the leadership. If we create the right environment, we will get people like Noah at the Four Seasons. If we create the wrong environment, we will get people like Noah at Caesar's Palace.
So we find that to be a pretty powerful video. In just 2 minutes, we learned about the different experiences that Noah had. And then we hold beliefs about which hotel we might stay at when we go to Vegas. Are you going to go to the Four Seasons or are you going to go to Caesars? So as these stories are being told, you can imagine how many times Simon's YouTube video has been shown across the globe, how many times we have shared it with our grantees. And these stories, people will say, I remember the story of Noah. I don't want to have a Noah at Caesar's Palace. And so how do we change the experience so that we can bring the best of all those we serve to the work that we do? So a few different ways to create experiences. One, firsthand. As Dr. Daher mentioned, you are having an experience right now. This is a firsthand, direct interaction together. So you are currently holding beliefs based on a firsthand experience. Another way is through stories, as I just shared with the story of Noah with Simon Sinek. And there are stories happening in our educational systems all over. We all know the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting. Those are a form of storytelling. So what stories are being told that are informing the beliefs of those we serve in education? And finally, system stories. Those are just kind of the mundane tasks and activities that we engage in that are pretty standard and anticipated experiences. And then there are different experience types. So when we work with our districts, we really break it down to those experience types. So again, we can address the question, so what, now what? So a type 1 experience is something that is meaningful, immediate, and needs no interpretation. And as Dr. Daher mentioned, these frameworks can be used in our personal lives and our professional lives. So I'll give you a quick example that I've shared with our grantees before that is a personal example of a type 1 experience. So I have 2 teenagers at home, 2 boys, 15 and 17. And I'm a busy working mom, right? And they are very busy teenagers. And one night I was making dinner, making a lasagna, and I made a mess. If you've ever made a homemade lasagna, as much of a Food Network star as you might think you are, you can create quite a disaster in the kitchen. And so I'm hurrying to get my then 16-year-old son, who wasn't driving yet, to football. And I told my younger son, hey, Josh, I have to take Justin to football. Kitchen's a mess. You know, we had dinner, it was great. I'll be back. Clean it. I'm out. I got to go. Great, Mom. When I come back from taking Justin to football, the kitchen's clean. And as most teenagers, you can't find him. He's in his room. And so I go and knock on the door and say, hey, Josh, did you clean up the kitchen? And he just nodded. No interpretation needed, right? So that was my experience. What now is my new belief about Josh? Number 1, teenagers know how to do dishes, okay? So new belief. Number 2, my belief is that he cares that Mom is trying to juggle a lot of things and is trying to bring her best to everything and can't always get it all done in a single day, right? And so what are the new actions I'm going to take? Well, I'm definitely going to reinforce that behavior and praise him, right? Anytime he contributes to the household, acknowledges and wants to pitch in and support. And his new actions may be that he might clean the kitchen a little more often. He might offer to help in advance, proactively. Hey, Mom, I know you're going to be busy tonight. Anything you need help with? And what are the results that we're going to get? Right? Happier mom, more unified, community pitch in around the house. So you can see how these examples that we share with our districts are not only in the educational realm, but also in the personal realm, because we don't separate ourselves, when 5 o'clock hits. A type 2 experience does need interpretation to change or inform desired beliefs. So for example, if a belief being held in a school community is that we operate in silos, that general ed is on one side of the house and special ed is on the other side of the house and never shall the two meet. If that is the belief, because maybe that's been the experience, we need to change that belief and call it out and change that experience. And so you might convene everyone for a staff meeting or a professional development event and call it out and say, I know the old belief that we held is that we operate in silos. The new belief I need you to hold is that we are in this together for every student every day. Therefore, look around the room and you'll see your colleagues for the first time in a staff meeting, the first time in a professional development meeting. So you're going to call that out very explicitly about the new belief that you want them to hold and the experience that you're going to create to inform that belief, so that we take new actions, because that will then foster collaboration. We get to know each other. We're going to start planning together before we even have that time technically carved out in a master schedule. We're going to say, hey, we were together in that meeting. That was great. Let's talk about a student that we share. That is our student, right? So you see the ripple effect of how our experiences inform our beliefs, inform our actions to get us the results that we get. A type 3 experience goes along with that, just kind of process experience. Those meetings, Zoom meetings and convenings like this that we know what to expect. We have had a very similar experience, and it requires no interpretation. A type 4 experience, one of those experiences you want to avoid at all costs. So we caution our grantees around this and say, avoid those type 4. They will always be misinterpreted. And so an example of that would be we're back to school. And sometimes things shift on a campus. Our staffing shifts, our student enrollment shifts. And so let's say the site principal decides that he or she, they is going to be so helpful and move your classroom for you while you're on break to the other building where they need you to serve in another grade level. And you show up and you put your key in the door and all of your stuff is gone. They think, or the principal thinks, they've done a great thing. They're helpful. The teacher may think, Do you know how long it took me to put the paper on those walls, right? I've had the same paper on those walls for years, or where's all my stuff? And there's this level of anxiety. And so the experience that was created was not the intended one. And now the belief is not the intended one. So you see how you want to avoid those type 4 experiences at all costs. So as we're proactively designing or redesigning, we want to think about what is the belief we want folks to hold, and is this experience going to enforce that belief or hinder that belief? So then we take this, this new learning and this knowledge and we put it into action. So when we work with our grantees, we'll workshop around this new learning, whether it's virtually or in person, and we'll take them through these steps. What is the B2, meaning the new belief, right? So B1, our current beliefs. B2 would be our new belief that we want you to hold. And then what are the experiences that you'll create? And we workshop around that together and provide some different examples, and then talk about how that aligns to those results. Because as Dr. Daher mentioned, we don't want to just keep layering new experiences and new activities and new plans that don't get to our intended results. So again, we workshop around creating these new experiences and start there. If we cut that pyramid at just actions and results, we will just spin, and we won't truly change the culture of inclusion for our students. So that concludes our formal presentation, and we are here for any questions that you may have.
Well, first I want to, on behalf of all of the commissioners, I want to thank you for your time and leading us through this experience. And I'll scan the dais. If you would like to make a comment or a question, please just alert me as I scan, and we'll go in order. What really strikes me is at the core of this are our beliefs. And so as we commissioners think about future agenda building, what are the experiences that we can have together that inform our beliefs, and then ultimately our actions and our advisement around the results that we want to see. And so appreciative of the initial framing, as well as your guidance last year through our strategic planning, and continuing to deepen our understanding about how we achieve the results that we envision. And so I'm scanning the dais for any comments. Commissioner Topalian.
I want to thank you guys again for presenting, and also your just collaboration with us throughout the years. And I think it does go back to just mindset and coming back and just everybody just being willing to collaborate with each other, because collaboration is the key. Even working for school districts and working with related services and things like that, and then also working with school teams, I think it all comes back to that, and also how we could support the student and the parents and the school community in itself. So thank you again, and I really truly believe it comes back to, supporting, and it's about I think you said something about the purpose being making sure it's intentional as well, the support, and that goes a long way. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Dawn, and I'm a parent of a student with extensive support needs who fortunately has had a very good experience being fully included from the moment she started attending an infant-toddler program. She started at the Chime infant-toddler program, then the preschool, and fortunately got into the elementary school and is now in middle school, 7th grade. So I love everything that comes out of SIP. I am passionate about inclusion and your mission, and thankful for you as an organization and every time you come here and present to us. And I sit on this commission because of my passion for inclusion and the need to perpetuate it more broadly, so that all students have the kind of experience that my daughter has had. The challenge that I see is there aren't a lot of opportunities for inclusion in high school. There seems to be this cliff that, particularly in our Chime community, everybody falls off. Where do you go for high school? And, there's always been a lot of discussion about a Chime high school, but never comes to fruition. So I actually have been working, trying to build maybe a collaboration with an existing high school in Chime and seeing where that can go, or if there's a pathway to that. But as you speak about grantees, I'm curious how one becomes a grantee of SIP for that kind of support.
Speak to that briefly, and I know that Shiloh can as well. So it's evolved over time. So there are kind of two different pathways to enter into the project. One is a review of the data in terms of what are the LRE or the least restrictive environment numbers, demographics in terms of geography, making sure that we're spanning across the state and not just sitting in one location. So when SIP first started, we were very heavy in Southern California districts because that's where just one or two of us used to work. So logistically, to get across, so as it's expanded, we've gone now into rural, urban, suburban, large, small, across the range. And so CDE really looks at a deep dive in the data and determines that and invites them in also based on the amount of funding available to go out. It's not a large amount, which is a testament to this work and to the belief, because again, that's not the incentive. The grant funding is not the incentive. It's the need and the desire to do the good work better and differently for kids. We are moving into kind of a 3.0 version where we're going to host and have demonstration sites. So hopefully Chime will be one of those for us. They've been a partner in this work for a very long time, and many people have had an opportunity to go and visit and tour classrooms and see how it's built and have taken that new learning back to their locations. So that aside, the other entry point is through the compliance and improvement monitoring system. So for those districts identified as targeted or intensive and work through steps 1 through 3 of their improvement process, once they land on their problem of practice, they may be assigned to us to help implement their plan. So there are a couple different routes. We are a small but mighty team, as I mentioned, and so we are currently serving upwards of 100 grantees. However, that is a small portion of the state, right? So that's why we're looking toward these demonstration sites to host folks to share learning, because it can't just come from within our team. We have to build the capacity within those locations, within those regions. So although we have these 100, kind of assigned grantees, we thought partner all over the state. And so we firmly believe that if you are in it and want to do better and differently for kids, we're going to use every last minute of the day we have to support that work. So we've never had someone call and we say, oh, you're not a grantee, so we can't talk and share. Everything is open source, open access. All of our events are free to everyone in the state. So that's another kind of pathway to access SIP and the team. I don't know if Danny and Juliet have anything else to share.
And just to speak a little bit more about our grantees, we have a subset of grantees that really live in the space of we really need to work on shifting mindsets. But we also have a subset of grantees that are their mindsets are shifted, and now we have to now pivot to now how do we shift beliefs into actions. So we have a lot of our grantees that are in that actionable area, and so that's where our demonstration sites come in, where now they're ready for action and they want to showcase what they've been doing. And so our grantees are on a continuum. Some we have to create those experiences for them. Some they're ready to start shifting beliefs. Some are just ready to start getting down to the work because our kids can't wait.
Yeah, I think the data that we get, the feedback we get from our grantees initially is we have a mindset barrier. Once we move past that, it's really like, okay, great, we'd love to do this work, but how? And I think that becomes that I don't want to call it fear, but maybe fear of the unknown, or maybe not having that clear path to what success or what inclusion might look like, tends to at times delay the initial work. And so that's why having grantees like Chime and some of these other demonstration sites is going to be really valuable for us to be able to take somebody and say, this is what it could look like. This could be your path to success, or some version of it for you. And so that's really the work that we're starting to engage in, as Dr. Anyanu just mentioned. When they move beyond mindset, it's what does it look like and how do we do this?
Commissioner Notch, then Commissioner Liu.
Thank you so much, as always, for your presentations. They're amazing. I was able to attend one of your sold out, I think, part 2 repeat sessions at the MTSS Professional Learning Institute, and was introduced to the results pyramid. And I don't remember if it was you, Dr. Brooks, or Kevin, who said that he thinks that it's illegal in California to do a presentation. Was that you? To do a presentation that doesn't include a pyramid. I thought that was so clever. And we do have a lot of pyramids. This is my favorite. And I've been thinking a lot about it since that presentation, and wondering in particular for those educators who are still working on that mindset shift, so not quite in that actionable phase of their expansion of inclusive practices. In your work, have you kind of honed in on any particular experiences that really create a big impact in working with your grantees on getting that mindset shift going and impacting some of their beliefs?
Definitely. So if you were in that presentation, you probably remember the 2 slides about clarity. And that is a huge experience for folks. So what I'm referencing is there were 2 photos. There was one of a very clear, beautiful day, sunny sky, clear path. And the other slide was a very dreary, same path, but very dreary, cloudy, could barely see ahead. And so the experience to create for people is, what is this supposed to look like? What does inclusion look like? Is it all kids included 100% of the day in all classes in all grade levels starting tomorrow? Is this slow inclusion? Do we have a plan where we're matriculating up through the system, preschool through high school? Are we starting at high school, going to preschool and sandwiching in between? Is it all teachers? Are we co-teaching? So there are a lot of questions that folks have that, as Dr. Daher mentioned, impede that progress. And oftentimes if we can't see it clearly and articulate it very clearly, then people will stop and they will go back to doing what they were doing. So the most impactful experiences, and I'll let my colleagues share, creating a very clear pathway, being very clear about what you mean about inclusion. So is it we're going to increase our LRE in 5% in 1 year? Is it that we're going to train 45 teachers in 45 days on universal design for learning, and everyone is expected to have 2 lessons in the shared drive by the end of the month? You know, being very clear on what those expectations are. But much like we don't want unfunded mandates, we don't want unrealistic, unsupported goals. And so part of the experience is to share with our folks, here's the path we're on, here are our very clear aims, and here are very clear resources, supports, professional development, coaching, progress monitoring. So when that plan is very clearly laid out, the anxiety about change starts to lower. And we've also seen through our data, we have about 8 or 9 years of longitudinal data now, and when we look back at the consistency of leadership, that's a huge factor. And we know that there's a lot of turnover in leadership. But we were just talking about Chime and how long has Dr. Studer been there, right? Several years, and has been able to keep that culture, reinforce that culture forward, that it is a fully inclusive TK through 8 site, and he will do whatever it takes to provide the resources and supports for his families and his students. So that's an example of, you know, that stable leadership being an experience. But I think above all, that very clear communication, clear pathway, and walking the talk. You know, if you say you're going to offer all the resources and supports beyond coffee and chocolate, you know, make sure, you know, you follow through. So.
And just to add on to what Kristen mentioned, I think in the work and conversations that I'm having with grantees is you can train up teachers and you can give them all the knowledge, but after a certain point, we have to start showing and not telling. And so teachers are hungry to see what this looks like in practice, hence why we are really pushing for demonstration sites so teachers can now connect the theory and the practice together and then determine what does that look like for my classroom. Also, additionally, in some of the work that I'm doing and conversations I'm having with grantees and shifting mindsets of their teachers is that we're We're really pushing leadership to bring teachers along for the ride. So inclusion isn't something that's done to them, but done with them. And so in shifting that buy-in to believe in, teachers need to see plans before they're published. Teachers need to give feedback on what this looks like for me in my classroom and for my kids. And so we see that shift in buy-in to believe in when teachers are part of the journey versus the journey already being created and saying, here, this is what you do in your classroom. And so, again, just like education should be done with our students and not to them, inclusion should be done with our teachers and not to them.
So we'll start, I believe I have two more commissioners, Commissioner Liu and Commissioner Oyakawa. And we'll spend about 5 more minutes on this item so that we can honor our commitments for the rest of the agenda. So commissioners who would like to make comment before we move to public comment, please begin lining up in the queue on the dais. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here and your presentation. I am a school board member in Southern California. And my question is not necessarily about your grantees, but one of the hindrances we have is the mindset of the parents of these students. They believe that specialized, separated education in a different part of the campus classroom is much better than the general education classroom, which is wrong. They believe that's actually the best education for their special students. Do you address this issue with any of your local educational agencies? I suppose those are your grantees.
Yeah, we do. And the way we do that when we are working with CAC boards and things like that is really push back on some of those, gently push back on some of those beliefs, right? That putting those kids way over there is better for everybody. And the way we do that is really kind of relate it back to real life experiences, right? And just kind of moving away from this idea of special needs and the fact that we all have our needs. And so needs is just a human condition, right? We all have our needs. And so as parents, right, if we need bread and milk and fruit and meat, we don't typically go to a butcher and a baker and a dairyman and whatever. We go to one place where we can have all of our needs met, right? And special education, the way it's been viewed, has been like, you can be here to get this, but then you go to that place to get that, and then you may need to go to someplace else to get some other need met, as opposed to an inclusive education is basically our supermarket where your needs can be met along with every other shopper, every other student in that space, right? And so just this idea that that special education are just services. They're just items on the shelf, right? Not a specialized supermarket. We don't do that in the real world. We don't go to this supermarket just for this, or only these people can go to this market. So we really kind of break it down to real world experiences for especially for our parents, things that they can relate to.
And just quickly, what we want to be mindful of is the law that tells us about the continuation or the continuum of placement supports and services. So what we don't want to give is the impression that we are forcing 100% of inclusion 100% of the time, because we do have varied needs. And so we want to make that an open continuum. At the same time, are we considering those harmful effects that we see in the individualized education program that we have to outline of just putting students in places for a matter of convenience for adults, because that's the system we have, versus is that truly where that student needs to receive those services, or frequency or intensity or duration of those services. So just mindful that the continuum exists.
And then just lastly, I think in our approach in my work with parents and leaders as they collaborate with parents, is that we often sometimes don't realize that we need to take a step back and take an inquiry stance with our parents and just ask questions, because oftentimes we're making statements, but we're not asking them, what do you think is right for your child, and how can we come together and figure this out? So that's the first step, like taking an inquiry stance, because I tell parents, you are your child's first teacher. I'm along for the ride, but you are their first teacher. And so I really seek them to form this collaborative relationship. In addition, also, oftentimes parents are not clear on what full inclusion looks like. And so we have to take that approach of showing them what's possible. Because again, inclusion is not a student readiness model. Our students are ready to be included. They were born to be included. And so taking that inquiry stance and really showing our parents what's possible, that I think will shift those mindsets, because then parents can see a different world that maybe they were not exposed to.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This has been a really powerful presentation. I'm also the parent of a student with disabilities. My daughter is entering 8th grade next week with, she's hard of hearing, and she also has 22q deletion syndrome. And actually my question was similar to Commissioner Liu's, but a little bit different. I live in Davis, and a lot of the families that I know with students with disabilities actually do embrace the inclusion and want their students to be included. It's more of a question I have, I guess, is how do you engage your clients or grantees to educate the other parents of the kids in the classroom, to let them understand. There was a part of your slide that mentioned how it benefited all students, right? How they all benefit, we all benefit when we are more inclusive. And I would love to see more across the country of inclusion, especially in the classrooms. But that mindset of changing that mindset of like, oh, I don't want to be in that class with the kids with all the IEPs. My daughter's lucky, she's in a charter school as well, that embraces all these students and all the families. My perception is that they are all welcoming of all students, and everyone is on, whether they have an IEP or not, everyone's got a need. And I think sort of universal design for learning is a part of the culture there. And I think the parents know that going in because they've opted into this school. But I wonder how we spread that message, how you teach your grantees to get that change in mindset on the parent side and the rest of the community. And then the second comment I had was to thank you, because my sister started this week. She's an elementary school teacher and is always, struggling to try to include everyone, whether they have an IEP or not, and knowing that part of what you're doing is to ensure that they are getting the hands-on, I think you said, like, the demonstration sites and just, the real practical, like how do we do this? And I'm going to say thank you on her behalf, but she's a little busy. Thank you.
So I think it starts with that culture of inclusion. And when you communicate that and you live by that and stand by that and make that part of your school culture, we'll start moving away from the days where we have to educate others and sort of ask permission for kids to be included. There are a couple of great YouTube videos out there where teachers are having students with disabilities go to the front and share their story and share about themselves and open up the questions to their peers. What questions do you have? And this one particular video, I'll find it and I'll share it with you. The students are not asking about their peers' disability. They're asking about, well, what TV shows do you watch? Are you into Legos? Do you play Minecraft? They are trying to find the commonalities. They're saying the differences are great, but how are we going to connect? What do we have in common? Because we're in class together. We may sit next to each other. What are we going to talk about during our community day, right? So I think that it's a shift and really focusing on the culture. I know back, several years ago, date myself here, working to build an inclusive preschool program, and was very clear with our parents who were enrolling their general ed students in the class, in the classes, and saying, we are an inclusive community. And some people are afraid of that because of the unknown, or how is my student going to progress alongside other students? And very strong, and if this is not for you, there are many other school opportunities for you, but here we are inclusive and we value everyone, and we're not going to turn anyone away because of any differences. We embrace that, we value that. So I think it does take leadership, a culture of inclusion, and really standing behind that, and being very open and embracing and valuing differences and diversity and variability versus apologizing for it, if that makes sense.
So I want to thank you so much for the presentation on behalf of all the commissioners, and to summarize thoughts for us moving forward as commissioners and also for the public. I want to expand our thoughts a little bit. The entire system of education in California is based on the local control accountability formula that is intended to center the voice and experiences of parents and families in our planning. And so as we look at the pyramid, think about, and let's reinforce, our system is based on the experiences of our families. How can we strengthen our ability to hear those experiences and stories firsthand through the processes that we have to inform the actions that we implement? And the last point is we are informing our beliefs, and I know our focus is on K-12. I'm going to challenge us to expand beyond that. One of the benefits from inclusion shared through the research is community membership. What are our beliefs about community membership for individuals with disabilities after high school? What do we believe the world should look like for a 35-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 60-year-old who has disabilities or has different needs? Those beliefs should also inform our planning and actions and experiences that we provide in our K-12 environment. And so, as we move forward, I'll ask our teammates from CDE if you could please post the slide for public comment. We'll transition to public comment, and if there are any members of the public who would like to make comments in the room, we would ask you to line up. Yeah. And so, Dr. Brooks, Dr. Dahir, and Dr. Anwud, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your inspiration, and please keep us informed of how we can continue to support your work.
Thank you for your time and for your support as well. Really appreciate it. This work isn't possible unless we're doing it all together. So.
I see one member of the public in the room.
Hi, good morning. Scott Turner, Executive Director of East San Gabriel Valley SELPA and also Chair-elect for SELPA Administrators of California. I want to thank Supporting Inclusive Practices for the thorough, yet what I would characterize humble presentation for the work they're doing across the state. They've been in this space for many, many years. Many of you know them for their dedication and professionalism around supporting inclusive practices. On a personal level, I've been fortunate to be a SELPA administrator in 2 different SELPAs that have had LEAs supported by SIP. I was the recipient of one of those kickoff messages that Dr. Brooks led years ago in one of those districts, and it still has an impact today in changing those mindsets and embracing on supporting inclusive practices. On behalf of the association, I want to acknowledge the work they're doing in the statewide system of support and also around the compliance improvement monitoring plans that many districts are working tirelessly on right now. We see a shift in making that work more meaningful and results-driven within districts, and practitioners need that. There's immense challenges kicking off the school years right now, and they still have those SIM plans that they're working on. And having professionals like SIP to support those districts is just truly meaningful and is going to have a huge impact on our students. So thank you.
Seeing no other members of the public in the room, are there any online comments?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you, everyone. We will move on to the next item. Item 2, the Grazer Outstanding Achievement in Learning Award. We are very happy to recognize the San Bernardino Unified School District and SELPA for their program related to Dyslexia Matters, Making the Invisible Visible. We would invite to the podium Dr. Lundy, as well as Ms. Castro, the Assistant Director of Instructional Services, and Dr. Lundy, the SELPA Director and Special Ed Director for San Bernardino Unified School District.
Good morning. Is this okay? So,
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Dr. Juana Lundy, and standing next to me is my Assistant Director, Ms. Barbie Castro, and we are proud to be from the city of San Bernardino, which is the 7th largest school district in California, serving over 51,000 students district-wide. So we provide special education and related services to over 6,000 students within our district. And 1,000 of them approximately meet the dyslexia profile, which is approximately 18% of our students who we find eligible within special ed. And as a special education department, our goal is to help our schools in establishing a continuum layer of supports through the MTSS process, especially in the area of basic reading, so that we can better identify students at risk. Because dyslexia is a neurobiological disorder based in phonological processing, but not all students need to be served in a special education classroom. Really, a lot of those services and supports should and can be provided within a general education setting. So within our mission and our vision with our dyslexia work in San Bernardino, we together, along with our partners, which included general education parents, Ms. Parra, I know you're out there watching, thank you, who helped to lead us with this work and also wrote a letter for us as well as school psychologists, speech therapists, our counterparts in gen ed, as well as our psychologists. And really we worked together tirelessly looking as a think tank, because really we didn't know what we were supposed to do next. So really researching the readings associated with dyslexia. What are the origins of it? What are some possible ways to be able to attack it in a way that would be actionable for our district? And really within that think tank, we were able to develop a task force. And we developed this task force within 2020 and started this work with just piloting different things and figuring out how are we going to move forward as a district. And with that, we were able to put together a brochure as well as a guide for families and established a 3-tiered approach for how we are going to screen and really service our students with dyslexia. And I'm going to pause for a second so Barbie can kind of explain what that 3-tiered model looks like.
So our Tier 1 Universal includes all students within our district who receive high-quality reading, ELA instruction through core classroom, through their core classroom. Students that are flagged for predictors of future reading difficulties, potentially dyslexia, then receive intentional strategies and resources. This may include like letter, sound, word sorts. It can include word study or even morphological awareness. So a lot of them are coached by our general education teacher, as well as we have a POC or point of contact within our department that specializes in dyslexia. Our Tier 2 is really more targeted, and they receive additional assessments or programs, and they still receive the Tier 1, but they also receive more of a focus on multisensory structured literacy. So this can include like syllable segmentation skills, phoneme segmentation skills, and so forth. Really, the instruction at this tier comes from the general education teacher and special education teacher with coaching support from their MTSS teacher on special assignment, as well as our special education dyslexia point of contact. When we go to our Tier 3 intensive and accelerated intervention for students with dyslexia not meeting both Tier 1 and Tier 2, this is more intensive skills-based instruction in addition to the core reading instruction. And really, we focus intentionally on Orton Gillingham reading and comprehension, more on the science of reading, receiving coaching support from an experienced tutor. So it's really intentional. And again, we have supports coming from our special education dyslexia point of contact as well. So really the point here is all of our students have access to the layered of continuum of supports, regardless of their achievement level. And what we found effective is the effectiveness of instruction, mindset shifts, as well as positive, meaningful interactions, such as the student-teacher relationships, and those are really the key elements to our program.
Yes, And with the recent passing of the initiative Every Student Succeeds Act, we really felt like we needed to get in front of this initiative. And so this is why we began this work. So in collaboration with our Ed Tech department, we personally have identified NWEA as one of our screeners because we know that the state of California hasn't officially identified what the screener is. But with that, we felt like we didn't want to add additional things to the plates of our general educators. So really utilizing the programs and supports we already had in place and organizing it from a structural perspective to make sure that all of our students are feeling supported. And some tensions that we found is we don't have local control over curriculum. And our response to intervention can be a challenge with our continuum from school to school. So really we feel like that coaching piece is really important. And also as was spoken about with our SEAL partners, that it's really the mindset that we all understand what happens to our students district-wide if we don't interrupt the non-reading before the third grade. And so once we can really touch into that emotional piece, we're really able to work with our counterparts in general education and really work together collectively to make sure that this work with dyslexia matters. So the work is also very personal for me because myself as a mother, I have a daughter who was struggling with reading, and as a special educator, we often self-diagnose our kids. You know, I don't know if you guys agree with that, but so I was really freaking out because my daughter was not reading and she was ending the first grade. And so I was really in the midst of working on this collective with one of our parents and really building the task force. And I was beginning to panic. And so I was like, well, hold on, I'm a special education director. I can do this, right? So I began to bring in some of that science of reading into my own home and kind of begin to build that system for her. And over the next 12 months, really being very intentional with her teacher, as well as myself, as well as with her. So now I'm very proud that she's in third grade and she is an avid reader and she began to love school again. But then the thought became, I'm a special education director and I'm struggling with it. The students that are sitting in our classrooms, they shouldn't have to struggle with that and not have somebody that advocates for them. So our goal as a district was to help our students, but hopefully just bring awareness statewide so that we know students who may not have advocates, who have parents, who are directors of special ed, but they're struggling with reading. We want to be able to have intervention, systems of support, as well as resources to support those families and those students who struggle with reading. We want to be pipeline disruptors for those students. And so that's kind of like what kind of led our work. So we appreciate this honor. We thank you for this platform. And we're so appreciative that you guys are also giving us lunch. That's it.
So on behalf of the entire commission, thank you so much for sharing the innovative programs that you have put in place. And I'll just give us some context before we have comments from other commissioners, and especially those who led the goal committee. One of our priorities last year were to highlight innovative programs that increase access to high-quality literacy programs. And so I want to acknowledge the team here for beginning us on that journey and also connect us back to our previous conversation about the power of experiences and stories. Our Governor, Gavin Newsom, has been very transparent about his challenges related to dyslexia, as have members of the State Board, as well as both houses of the Legislature, and Superintendent Thurman's Reading Initiative centers on the experiences and challenges of, that illiteracy creates lifelong, and has set very ambitious goals. I also want to acknowledge the State SELPA Association, who I know firsthand, going back, I'm going to date myself, a long time, advocating for the approach related to the dyslexia guidelines and how we can demystify what this looks like and ensure that there is access to these important programs, but also recognition of not just the component of being literate, but the anxiety that creates and how that impacts other aspects of life and well-being. I think those of us in professional settings, anytime there's an opportunity to read a paragraph out loud, I know I still, please someone else jump forward. And so really getting in to the universal experience that we all share and how we can begin to ensure that the environments that we're creating are inclusive, but also flexible enough, and I love the supermarket analogy, that all needs can be met in those settings. So thank you so much for your presentation. And I will ask for other commissioners to share any comments, questions, or thoughts. Scanning. Commissioner Oyakawa.
Congratulations.
and welcome to Sacramento. We kept it hot for you guys to come up there. On behalf of the Goal Award Committee, we want to thank you for sharing. Besides doing the work that you do, sharing it out is almost as important for the rest of us. And so you have demonstrated that we can do this. And I know that there is some pushback on how dyslexia can be addressed in all classrooms, right? How can we support teachers who are already overworked and overburdened in being able to support these students when there is some concern, can the teachers do it? And it sounds like you have really shown us how it can be done, how we can reach all the students and help them wherever they are, tier 1, 2, or 3. And so it's exciting to see that. And we are so grateful that you're doing this work for your students, but that you are also able to take the time. And we know you're busy, and to submit that application is not, it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. And so we want to say thank you for sharing with us, for coming out today and talking to us about it. And I hope that we hope that you will continue to share out how your practices came about, how it can be implemented in other places. And as it evolves, because it's not a static thing, we'd like to learn more about how things progress over time, what more results you see coming down the line. Because you're right, we don't all not all kids have special ed directors as parents, lawyers as parents, and we want to reach every kid and give every kid that opportunity. So whether they're identified as a student with a disability beforehand or not, they all deserve this opportunity to be able to read. It's just so crucial to every aspect of their lives. So thank you so much. And thank you to SELPA, Scott in the back. Thank you to the SELPA Association. You guys are amazing. And for sponsoring this lunch for us so we can really celebrate our winners today. Thank you.
I just wanted to say congratulations from your neighbors in Riverside County.
Yay, thank you.
Seeing no additional comments for the podium, before we transition to public comment, we've begun recognizing the partnership with the State SELPA Association, Special Education Local Plan Area Administrators of California, for their support of the Goal Award this year in terms of providing some resources for recognition and the opportunity to have an experience over lunch. And so before we transition to public comment, Chair-elect Turner, if you would like to make a few comments, I want to invite you up on the spot to do that. But then also use this as an opportunity to highlight and emphasize the SELPA structure that allows for the dissemination of best practices. Director Lindy talked about, 7th largest school district in California. And so I'm very pleased that we were able to partner with the SELPA Association to scale this resource and share, because the goal of the Gold Award is to lead to the replication and scalability of best practices. So again, thank you so much for sharing with us, and I'll yield the floor to Chair-elect Turner.
Thank you, Chair Tostin. Thank you, commissioners. I also want to congratulate San Bernardino City Unified School District and thank the commissioners for really highlighting and shining these programs that are working throughout our state. We are a large state, so that is very important. And I imagine emails and calls are already flowing to San Bernardino City. As you mentioned, Chair Tostin, dyslexia is going to be a hot topic next year through the enacted budget, and all districts are going to be looking for that technical assistance and support. I'm going to use Dr. Brooks's phrase earlier, tagline. State SELPA has a tagline, making it happen, each student every day. We're aware that there's needs throughout the state, and we want to try to address those needs. We have a strategic plan and activities that we are using to address that. But we also know that there needs to be a balance, and we need to really shine the light on programs and parts of our system that are working. And so it was through our association that we saw an opportunity to partner with ACSE to really support this goal award. We're a 501c6, a nonprofit organization, and through some of those activities, we've been generating some revenue, doing professional development, and supporting districts throughout the state, and we saw no better way to use that revenue than to support this ongoing award, the goal award. So thank you. The thank you is really not needed. We're just very appreciative for being here, and we want to, again, just acknowledge the work of San Bernardino City Unified School District. Thank you.
Thank you. And so the Goal Award Committee will be convening tomorrow during committee time to discuss some of the next steps in terms of how we work with State SELPA to conclude our recognition of San Bernardino City this year at a subsequent or a following SELPA meeting where we can share the information as well as have an opportunity to provide a plaque to the district in terms of future recognition. So again, thank you for your flexibility and responsiveness to be here today. And thank you to our partners for making this happen, the State SELPA Association, as well as the Grazer family for their donation several years ago. With that, I will pause and ask for the slide for public comment to be posted for members attending via the web. And if there are any members of the public in the room who would like to make comments, we invite you to the podium now. There appear to be no members of the public in the room who would like to make comments. We will check online. Are there any public comments?
There are no comments at this time, no callers.
So with that, we will move to conclude this agenda item. If there were members of the public who would like to make comments and couldn't dial quick enough, I will remind you that there is an email address, and all public comments that we receive via email will be included in the packet at the next meeting. With that, we will take a look at our agenda, and we are going to be transitioning to lunch. It's 11:35. After lunch, we will have a presentation from our partners at the Department of Education and related to the English Language Proficiency Assessment of California, and updates to that have been made. And so we will return at exactly 1 p.m. Commissioners, I would ask that you be back on the dais at 12:55. And we will begin at 1 p.m. Until then, the webcast will be paused. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon portion of the Advisory Commission on Special Education. We hope everyone enjoyed their break. We will be going into item 3, a presentation on the English Language Proficiency Assessment of California. We'll be hearing updates from our partners at CDE. And as a way of reminder, we are relying on the support of interpreters and closed captionists. And so please monitor your speaking into the microphone as well as the pace of your conversation so that everyone can access our conversation. With that, we will turn it over to Director Moreno Ramirez to begin our presentation. Thank you so much for being with us.
The opportunity to be with you. I'm Alicia Moreno Ramirez, the Director of the Multilingual Support Division at the California Department of Education, or CDE, and I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Mao Vang, Director of Assessment Development and Administration Division, and we are joined online by Dr. Kelly Bacher, Assessment Development and Administration Division, Psychometrics, Evaluation, and Data Office Administrator, who will co-present. I apologize. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Today's presentation will cover the following: a description of English learner and dually identified students and services, context around the use of the Summative Alternate English Language Proficiency Assessment for California, known as the ELPAC, an overview of the 2 reclassification studies, the Threshold Validation Study and the Supplemental Empirical Analyses, and the results of both studies, our approval by the State Board of Education, implementation by the CDE, and response to your questions. So to provide some background, English learners are students who enroll in a California school at any grade level, kindergarten through grade 12, and have a language other than English identified on the Home Language Survey, and upon assessment, demonstrated a level of English language proficiency that indicates EL programs and services are necessary. Students identified as English learners receive programs and services until they meet reclassification criteria pursuant to Education Code 313. Dually identified students are those who are identified as English learners and who are also children with disabilities under the Individuals with Disabilities Act as defined in in United States Code Section 14013A. Dually identified students receive both English learner programs and services and special education and related services. We ensure that eligibility for special education services is not based on English language proficiency. Services for dually identified students. Dually identified students are entitled to all services and supports for students with disabilities included in the Individualized Education Program, or IEP, Section 504 plan, or Section 504 plan. Inclusion in the regular education program and a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, as well as all services and supports for English learner students, including but not limited to integrated and designated English language development instruction and participation in annual language assessment with the goal or expectation of reclassification and eventual exit from EL status. Dually identified students with the most significant cognitive disabilities are identified by local IEP teams. The 4 reclassification criteria found in Education Code Section 313F provide an expectation of what is needed for an English learner student, including dually identified students, to be considered proficient, beginning with the assessment of English language proficiency level. Reclassification is a comprehensive process where all 4 criteria are to be met for a student to be reconsidered for reclassification. The California State Board of Education approved the threshold for Criterion 1, and local educational agencies may determine locally which measures may be used to meet Criterion 2 through 4. Criterion 1, assessment of language proficiency using an objective assessment instrument, but not limited to the English language development test that is developed or acquired pursuant to Section 60810. Criterion 2, teacher evaluation, including but not limited to a review of the pupil's curriculum mastery. Criterion 3, parent opinion and consultation. And Criterion 4, comparison of the performance of the pupil in basic skills that demonstrate whether this pupil is sufficiently proficient in English to participate effectively in a curriculum designed for pupils of the same age whose native language is English. It's important to note that reclassification of a dually identified student is a process that is centered around the specific student and their IEP team. As such, Criterion 2 through 4 are central to this process as they focus on educator and family consultation. Now I will hand the presentation over to Dr. Mao Vang and Dr. Kelly Bacher to discuss some additional details about the alternate ELPAC assessment and the analyses that informed the CDE recommendation to the SBE. Unmute. Okay, Kelly, if you're with us, can you please unmute?
Yes, I'm off mute. I believe Mao was going to step up next. Is that correct?
Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon, Chair Toston and members of the Commission. I'm Mao Vang. As Alicia mentioned, I'm the Director for the Assessment, Development, and Administration Division at the California Department of Education. In this next few slides, I will review the context around the use of the alternate ELPAC for determining English language proficiency level of English learners with the most significant cognitive disabilities who may be eligible for reclassification to Fluent English Proficient. The development of the summative alternate ELPAC for English learner students is the first of its kind in the state and is a demonstration of our California's commitment to innovation and rigor in assessment to be inclusive of all of our students. The design is focused on equity and helps standardize students' reclassification experiences. The CDE is engaged in cross-division collaboration among our multilingual support division, our special education division, and also our assessment division. And that's why we're collaborating to bring this presentation to you. Participation in the English Language Proficiency Assessments for duly identified students. They're required to participate. Participation is required for all English learner students. And that range of participation in assessments includes full participation in the summative English Language Proficiency Assessments for California or ELPAC with accommodations, or they have partial participation in that summative ELPAC with domain exemptions, or the third way is they participate in an alternate assessment like the alternate ELPAC. Where the student's IEP team has determined that they should take an alternate assessment, we used an approach called Alt for All that provides eligible students who take one alternate assessment to take all alternate assessments. For example, let's say a student takes the California Alternate Assessment for English Language Arts, and they will also participate in the alternate ELPAC if that student is also an English learner student. And during the operational field test, that first year where the tests are administered and counts the scores in the 2021-22 school year, approximately 17,000 students in grades kindergarten through grade 12 took the alternate ELPAC. I'd just like to capture some key milestones of the development of the alternate ELPAC thresholds and the assessment over the years. In May of 2019, the California State Board of Education, or SBE, approved the high-level test design. From there, 1 year later, they approved the test blueprint. And then our test contractor, ETS, started developing the assessment in June 2020 through October 21. As you may recall, there was a global pandemic in that period of time. That's why it took a little bit longer. And it became we started the operational field tests in November 2021 through May 2022. In that time, ETS held standard setting workshops where panel judgments were set for the alternate ELPAC level 1 through level 3. And they were later reviewed by our California Assessment System Technical Advisory Group and various interest holder groups as well. And then in the course of that standard setting workshop, the educator panel experts, or educator panel, they're teachers in the field, they defined level 3 as, on the alternate ELPAC as the Fluent English Proficient level, and further defined these students at level 3 as having sufficient English proficiency, and they may need occasional linguistic support to enable them to access adapted grade level content standards in English. Because students who take this alternate ELPAC are more or less a heterogeneous group. Right? There's no single profile of a student who fits this level 3 definition, but rather they arrive at this proficiency level having different abilities or disabilities, using different communication modes and receiving individualized education programs and supports. The panel judgments inform the recommended alternate ELPAC thresholds, which were approved by the State Board of Education in May of 2022. So the State Board of Education approved the recommended thresholds that also defined that level 3 as Fluent English Proficient. When we go through that sort of process, then the next steps were to identify and conduct follow-up analyses to empirically evaluate and confirm thresholds for reclassification. It's this multiple measures or approaches to the decision making. And since October of last year, we have been working with the Regional Educational Laboratories West, or RAL West, we call them. We partner with them to coach our CDE staff to evaluate the approved thresholds, which brought us to the recommendation that that are related to reclassification and in which we took to the board last May. So now I'd like to have our Dr. Kelly Bacher to share the results of those 2 studies with you and how they have informed our recommendation for the state board. Kelly, all yours. I will advance the slides for you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Bacher, the administrator of the Psychometrics Evaluation and Data Office at the CDE. And as Mal and Alicia mentioned, in April of this year, the CDE provided the SBE with a memorandum that described the results from 2 studies that we conducted to evaluate the summative alternate ELPAC thresholds, or sometimes called CUT scores. The purpose of these 2 studies was to evaluate the thresholds using information on student performance on the alternate ELPAC, educator judgments, and performance on the alternate assessment in English language arts, or the CAA for ELA. Next slide, please. The first study was the threshold validation study. And the purpose of this validation study was to evaluate the threshold scores that were approved by the SBE in May of 2022. And these provided performance levels on the assessments. Data for this study included student performance levels that were based on 2 processes. First, we used alternate ELPAC test scores that were derived from the standard setting process. And second, we used student performance level judgment data collected from educators using an in-test survey. In essence, we sought to compare the results of the assessment with student evaluations that were provided by educators. And both the groups of educators used the SBE approved descriptors to describe 3 performance levels: novice English learner, or level 1, intermediate English learner, level 2, and fluent English proficient, level 3. Next slide, please. The results of this first study indicated moderate agreement between the educator ratings and the threshold scores overall. And it identified some trends by grade level and performance level. As you can see in the table here, the percent agreement between educator ratings and the alternate ELPAC ranged from 72.4% to 80.5%. And the overall agreement rate was 73.3%. These results provide support for the threshold scores for the alternate ELPAC, as educator judgments of students based on their classroom observations largely concurred with the classifications based on the assessment scores. As I mentioned, there was also a trend observed across data collection methods, and that was that the percentage of students who were classified as fluent English proficient tended to increase as student grade level increased. Next slide, please. Moving on to the second study. This study consisted of supplemental empirical analyses for which Rel West, as Mal mentioned, provided coaching and technical support to us at CDE to conduct and interpret the analyses. The methods that we used in this project were developed in 2012 with support from the U.S. Department of Education, and were specifically designed to support state education agencies like us in using empirical data to inform decisions about thresholds and policies for EL reclassification. They involve three approaches, which we'll discuss in a moment, that use ELP, or English Language Proficiency Assessment, and content achievement data to identify an appropriate ELP cut score for reclassification. These methods have been used previously in other states and in California for the general ELPAC, and has also been used with the same population of students who take alternate assessments. These methods are designed to reflect the language and logic of the two most recent reauthorizations of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. By supporting states to identify the point at which language proficiency and academic achievement become less tightly coupled for students who are assessed in both areas. So for example, we know that students who are not yet proficient in English generally tend to do poorly on assessments that are administered in English, which means that there's typically a strong relationship between performance on the two assessments. Students who do poorly in ELP also tend to do poorly in academic content assessments. At some point, though, when students have sufficient English proficiency to meaningfully interact with an assessment, we should start to see a broader range of academic performance. As with all students, we would expect that some students will be really good at, say, mathematics, many will be average, and some will really struggle. This would mean that students with the same level of English proficiency may have a much broader range of academic content scores, leading to a less strong relationship or correlation between the two assessments. The authors of these methods argue that at or beyond this point is where where an ELP performance standard might be considered. So that's the methodological background for these methods. And on the next few slides, I'll show some examples of the results of these analyses. Next slide, please. The first method is called descriptive box plots. And the goal here is to determine at what ELPAC level are at least half of the students above the cut score for proficient on the ELA assessment. So to orient us to this figure, on the horizontal or x-axis, we have students grouped by their performance on the alternate ELPAC. So we can see level 1, level 2, and level 3. We also have students who are classified as English only, or EO, initial fluent English proficient, or IFEP, and students who are reclassified fluent English proficient, or RFEP. The student group on the right, TBD, are students whose English language status has not yet been determined and tends to represent a very small group of students. On the vertical or y-axis, we have these students' performance on the ELA, or English Language Arts assessment. The box and whisker plots show the distribution of student scores on the ELA assessment. And you can think of these boxes as a typical bell curve that's kind of been turned on its side. So the majority of students are in the rectangle with fewer on the tail ends. And finally, the horizontal red at 460, I believe it is on this, is the threshold for proficiency on the ELA test. So here we can see that alternate ELPAC level 3, here we can see that alternate ELPAC level 3 is the achievement level at which roughly half of students are at or above proficiency on the ELA assessment. This visualization also confirms that the alternate ELPAC achievement levels are functioning as intended. We see the distribution of CAA for ELA achievement trending upward for each achievement level. It's also worth noting here that you may have seen that the alternate ELPAC level 3 students circled here are outperforming their English only, IFEP, and RFEP peers, the latter of whom were reclassified based on locally determined criteria. We expect that the trends for IFEP and RFEP students may change over time as the field grows more familiar with the assessments and the thresholds. I'd also like to note that wherever possible, we also looked at results for the 2 largest disability groups in our sample, which are students with autism and students with intellectual disabilities. And the results for these groups were remarkably consistent with the results of the overall sample. And this was true for all 3 of our methods. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second method, called logistic regression, focuses on identifying the alternate ELPAC score or performance level at which students have a 50% chance of scoring proficient on the ELA assessment. We focus on 50% because that would mean a student would have a roughly equal chance of being proficient or not proficient. For this figure, you see along the horizontal x-axis, we have the student scores on the alternate ELPAC. And on the vertical y-axis, we have the probability that the student is proficient on the ELA test. The 50% probability level is indicated with the horizontal red line. The vertical dashed lines indicate where the cut scores are for our 3 alternate ELPAC levels. We see here that our blue regression line reaches 50% probability within alternate ELPAC level 3. Next slide, please. So given that in our first analysis, we saw that English-only students tended to not be performing proficiently on the ELA assessment, we also conducted what we're calling an equity check using the logistic regression method by using the midpoint of performance level 2 on the ELA test as a target. Using the midpoint of level 2 on the ELA assessment instead of level 3 may better reflect reclassification criterion 4 that Alicia mentioned, related to performance of EL students compared to their English proficient peers. Using this as the target, alternate ELPAC level 3 also works for most grades as a performance threshold. Next slide, please. The logic for the final method, decision consistency, is to identify the score range at which the most students are consistently classified across the alternate ELPAC and the CAA for ELA. Consistent here means that they're either proficient on both assessments or not proficient on either. We're trying to maximize instances where students are proficient on one assessment but not the other. On the horizontal axis, we have students again grouped by their alternate ELPAC performance level, Here we've split them into smaller buckets of low and high for each level. So for example, on the left, we see performance level 1, low, performance level 1, high, and so on. With this method, we hope to see, and on the y-axis, we have the percentage of students who are consistently classified, again, as either proficient on both tests or not proficient on either. And we're hoping to see an inflection point where the consistency decreases or starts plateauing, indicating that we are maximizing the decision consistency. And the results on this graph are clearest for grade 3, which shows a peak in consistent classifications at the lower end of alternate ELPAC level 3. The other grades do not reach a similar peak, but they do affirm that across the performance continuum, consistent classifications are highest at alternate ELPAC level 3. Next slide, please. We conducted another equity check with this method using the midpoint of level 2 on the ELA assessment as the target. Here, all grades now show a clear point of inflection beyond which the percentage of consistent classifications decreases. Across the grades, the peak in consistent classifications occurs in the lower half of level 3, the lower half of level 3 or the higher half of level 2, as indicated circled on the slide here. These exploratory results affirm that level 3 is an appropriate reclassification threshold on the alternate ELPAC. Next slide, please. In summary, the threshold validation study compared student performance on the alternate ELPAC with educator judgments, and the supplemental empirical analyses evaluated the relationship between student performance on the ELPAC and their performance on the ELA assessment. Taken together, the results of these studies support the use of alternate ELPAC performance level 3 as an appropriate threshold for reclassification criterion 1. And this is based on more than 60 analyses of alternate ELPAC students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 who also had ELA assessment scores. I now welcome back Alicia Moreno Ramirez to share the language that was approved by the State Board of Education in May and to share the CDE implementation plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bacher. To recap, the California State Board of Education approved the use of overall level 3 or Fluent English Proficient on the summative alternate ELPAC to meet criterion 1 of the 4 reclassification criteria for English learner students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Resources and support for implementation will include a guidance letter to the field confirming summative alternate ELPAC, overall performance level 3, for reclassification. That letter went out June 13th of 2023. Additional support will come in the form of technical assistance webinars to address the reclassification process. Any future content updates will be made to the reclassification and ELPAC web pages, to the reclassification annual I'm sorry, let me say that again, and the annual ELPAC information guide. Following the May 2023 SBE action, the most recent update to the reclassification webpage was made in June, and the annual ELPAC information guide was updated in July of 2023. There will be a robust layer of tools and guidance to support educators in the field. We now welcome any clarifying questions about the update we've presented today.
Just going to make a quick note to myself to avoid logistic regression immediately following lunch for future meetings. And two questions, or one request and then a reflection. And so the first, the request, and I may be showing my age here. If I attempted to summarize this information in a tweet, and I know that's old school, how might I, I haven't updated my software yet, so how might I share this with a community member, a family member, in terms of what this means in a concise manner? And secondly, recognizing that I think you called out there were 17,000 students who were identified as duly identified. If we wanted to see overall performance of this group of students, is there a way to do so on the dashboard or on the special ed side of the house or the English language learner side of the house in terms of data sets?
I will respond, David, to the first question. Thank you so much. So in a tweet, we recommend the SBE approves, the use of overall performance level 3 on the summative alternate ELPAC for decision-making around reclassification for dually identified students.
And so just to confirm my understanding, this change allows us to identify student strengths and assets in a way, and like learning and growth and proficiency more very clearly, and it's been validated by, I think you said 60 assessments and a number of stat stuff. I'm an English major by trade, so lots of math went into this, and we are able to identify our students' proficiency and growth in a more efficient manner?
Yes. Thank you for that recap.
Thank you. And so I'll scan the dais. Oh, and so the second question around the data set for duly identified students.
I'm going to defer, Shiloh. I don't know if you can answer that question.
So we identify all students with disabilities, and if they have passed the ELPAC, reminder that the ELPAC is given to school-age children, and so we do not have currently an English language assessment for children who are in preschool. And so when we're identifying students who are EL and who are also a student with a disability, then they would be our school-age children who have not passed the ELPAC.
I would just like to add that all the results of the assessment are also posted online, the aggregate results on our test results for California's assessments website for the 21-22, and we are working on providing that for the 22-23 sometime in the fall.
Thank you very much. I'll scan the dais for additional questions or reflections.
That was a lot of statistics and math that went over my head. So I just wanted to ask, I guess, from a practical level, what do you expect to see as far as how this plays out with like students who are in school now, like what in families? What do we expect to see as far as when this gets rolled out, the impact on how students are reclassified and numbers going up or down, or is it just unifying everybody?
I can speak to part of this. We definitely expect to see standardization across the state as we have this common assessment that IEP teams and local education agencies can lean on to support these dually identified students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. I think we also anticipate that we will have we'll have a change certainly in the number of students reclassified because there is now a common standardized tool. Mal, would you add anything to?
Yes, and all these additional analyses, although we bring it to you, we know that your daily life may not involve all these different types of analyses, but we just want to reassure you that in our work, we try to cover all the bases. It's not that only educators and the state board make a decision on a cut score, but we're doing additional work as data become available to analyze the data and make sure that we are making using that data to inform the decisions on a deeper level, and then bringing it to you for so that the field to you and the field to use and to rest assured that we've done everything we could with the data we have to solidify those types of decisions. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes, and thank you. My ignorance and my inability to understand things makes me that much more grateful that you are all doing this heavy lifting. So good to see the validation of all the information. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to read the data here. So on the threshold validation study results, for the 6th through 8th grade, it was the lowest at the 68, where everything else was like 80. Is there a reason for that?
Are you talking about this one? Oops. Yes, this is the threshold validation study. Kelly, I think you might still be online. This is the teacher agreements to, in terms of the percent agreement of teachers to the students' results, right? Of what level they should be. Kelly, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can tell you, thank you for pointing that out. We don't have a clear reason that we're sure why that one is a bit lower. I can tell you my personal hypothesis, which is that we're asking educators to use their experiences with the children to rate them basically into these different levels based on their English proficiency. And I expect as students are getting into the middle school environment, the teachers don't see them for as many hours a day, right? And so their exposure is lower. And so I think we might expect to see a dip as we move into the middle school and high school grades.
And again, I'd like to point out that the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, where this test is designed for, there's only about 1% in our state of the student population that qualify for this. So it's a very small population, and these numbers, even though the numbers vary, I do have one hypothesis too that I'd like to share, that in terms of that grade 3, I mean, most students who are probably up there may already be reclassified by the time they're in grade 3. So that's why you see a little dip in the upper grades there.
Thank you so much. And just in closing comments, I wanted to call out two things. One, just the recognition, and on 2 times through the presentation, there was the equity check. I want to be clear, nationally, that's not something everyone gets to do. And so I want to further commend the work of the department in being sensitive to ensuring that we are designing our tools and systems with a level of sensitivity that reflects the diversity of our state. Secondly, the experience that we've all just gone through in terms of talking about math after lunch, equate that to an IEP team where the school psych, the speech pathologist, the occupational therapist goes through lots of numbers, and the grace and technical expertise it takes to communicate that information for informed decision-making and feedback. And so for our partners at the department who presented today, we wanted to thank you for making this digestible for us, as well as modeling for us how to monitor our communication so that we can support our coworkers, the interpreters who are with us today. So with that, I will transition and ask the slide for public comment, and ask if anyone in the room would like to make a public comment, if you would begin lining up at the podium. We'll pause for about 30 seconds to facilitate that. Seeing no public comment in the room, we'll close public comment in the room. Are there any online public comments?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you, everyone. And so we will transition to our next item at 1:45, a report regarding the System of Support leads. Is the next presenter online already, or do we need to pause for a moment? Okay. Before we transition to this presentation, just a quick aside to the interpreters in the room. Thank you for slowing us down. I want to empower you anytime you need to flag one of us to slow down, to please do so. You're welcome. With that, we will transition to, in full transparency, my colleague. We work in the same organization, Mindy Fatig, who's a senior advisor with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, who will provide us a summary of the data from last year related to the program leads within the statewide system of support, as well as provide us an update on current happenings within the system of support. Mindy, thank you so much for being with us today.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Chair Tostin. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all. And I'll start my slideshow here in a minute, but I'm just really grateful also to be a participant and listening to the conversations today, not only from my colleagues in the EL division at CDE, but also from SIP and Imperial County and their relationship through the SELPA that they have to the system of support. My internet, unfortunately, is a little bit spotty. I do apologize for not being there with you. We are unfortunately experiencing some wildfires way up here in far northern California. So PG&E let us know that we may have some intermittent interruptions. So hopefully everything will be okay throughout this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you here. And I believe all of you have that. Bear with me here a second. All right. Can everyone see that, or just a head nod? I can't see folks in the room, so any verbal commissioners would be great.
We can see your slide deck. Thank you. You're all good.
Thank you. All right. So again, as Commissioner Chair Tostin was saying, I am a senior advisor with California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And throughout this opportunity today with you is to be able to share a little bit about what CCEE does, who we are, in particular, the statewide system of support, as well as do a brief overview of the evaluation of the SELPA leads, which their term ended June 2023. So I'd like to give you a summary of their evaluation data, and most importantly, their impact to the field that their work has had. Lastly, we'll also be talking about the new special education resource leads, along with my colleagues at CDE and the state board in selecting those leads to continue for the next 5 years. So moving ahead here, thank you very much. Again, there's the agenda. So real briefly, I know you have another action or information item on your agenda today to discuss this, but as CCE, we're a state agency established in 2013, and really as a result of the LCAP to help LEAs successfully implement their LCAP goals, particularly focusing on historically marginalized populations. We're here to improve outcomes. Our just cause at CCE is to inspire change, and we can only do that if we work together in a collaborative way. And so you'll see that theme throughout, especially as we talk about the system of support and the integration of the leads throughout that. Again, the LCAP, and we do that for providing resources. Before we go on to the next slide, everyone says, what is your why in this work? And you saw a little video from Simon Sinek earlier with Noah and his why at the coffee shop at the Four Seasons. And it really brought me back to my passion in this work. I've been 27 years in special ed and education in a variety of roles. But really my passion is as a parent of 2 adult children. Both of them have disabilities. One had an IEP and one did not. And it made me think of in the inclusive practices of why we're doing the system of support. And really the reason that we're better together in the system is really, I'm thinking about my son who's now 23. He has a right side hemiplegic cerebral palsy. And he wore braces all of his life in school. And he was in a really comfortable K-8 school. And it reminded me of the commissioner talking about Chime and her own child in education right now. He was really comfortable in a K-8 small rural school. And he would every year talk about his braces and why he has them. He would talk about cerebral palsy, and even as a third grader and all the way through to 8th grade. But then when he got past 8th grade and he transitioned into a high school, he didn't want to talk about his disability. He didn't want to wear his braces, and it had an adverse effect on him as a child through high school. So my passion, my why in the system is really to make sure that we can provide the necessary supports for our students as not an afterthought, but as a proactive, inclusive environment. So I just wanted to share that little bit about me, and you can see why my passion in the system continues. So see, the CCEE is broken up into 3 centers. We have the I3, which is focusing on research, statewide access, data analysis. Our TLLC center directly works with districts in direct technical assistance. And those are identified, those districts that need support from CCEE as a state agency. And then we have the Transformative Systems for Equitable Outcomes, which is the center that Chair Tostin and I are senior advisors in. And really that's about the system of support. How do we integrate all the state's resources and these amazing resources, supports, consultation, coaching to really make sure that it's making a difference to our kids sitting in classrooms day to day, and that our teachers and educators and families get the supports that they need in order to work collaboratively to improve outcomes for our kids. So here we are. Here's our pictures. So you can see this is our center. You can see where we've lived throughout California and where we currently work from. As I said, I'm in far northern California right now. I'm in Del Norte County, the last county in California on the coast, and collective good wishings that the wildfires and the firefighters can put out the fires up here we have. So with that, our center is well diverse in a wide variety of practitioners from the field, including some researchers and evaluators as well. So statewide system, while we're here. So the statewide system, again, was really formed out of the LCAP and really having folks, tools, resources, supports, and experts in the field to help LEAs implement their LCAP goals. So this was last year's lead agencies. We're going to be updating this map for you, but you can see it's comprised of quite a few different initiatives. And the ultimate goal is really to provide the services that the districts need when they need it in the most seamless way we can. Really focusing on equity and access. Really, relationships are the foundation, but we need to go beyond relationships so that no matter where you're at in California, what chair you sit in a school, that you have the same equity and access to resources and support that anyone else does in California. And so really that's what we're moving towards on the increased collaboration that we'll talk about and share about a little bit today. We are working on a searchable database. Hopefully it'll be launched in September through CCEE. And that's where anyone can go on to CCEE's website and search for who is my English language learners lead for students with disabilities. And there'll be contact information for them as well. So questions first, or I guess I'll wait for questions at the end, but that was a system of support. So Commissioner Tostin, do you want me to continue and wait for questions at the end?
Yes, we'll hold questions until the end. Thanks, Mindy.
Perfect. Okay, so that was a brief overview of system of support. But what I do want to take a little bit of time here today is really review the 5 years of data from the SELPA leads, the special education local plan area. Those, again, termed out June 2023. And some amazing data has come out of that. And again, the data is not only from the people in the system of support who has accessed these initiatives, but also LEAs and families who maybe weren't familiar with the SELPA lead supports, but in some way were accessing their supports or consultations and or resources. So these were the 5 SELPA leads. Again, there's system improvement leads as well as content leads. One of the content leads is the EL, English Language Learners lead for students with disabilities, the dually identified students that we just heard from Alicia and her team talk about. We also had Marin County, which focused on serving students with autism or resources for students with autism. Placer County SELPA really focused on universal design for learning. and assistive technology and alternative augmentative communication. El Dorado, West San Gabriel, and Riverside were the system improvement leads, and those are still continuing. And again, South County SELPA was a data analysis for equity and disproportionality. So this summary that I'm going to show you here briefly is an aggregate based on the feedback of the overall SELPA leads evaluation. So through RTI, which was our evaluator for this project, we focused on what were the effective features in building capacity, what was the impact, how, and beyond impact, can it be sustained beyond the grant period, beyond the people? So is the work going to be sustainable, and what connections were made or still need to be made throughout the system of support to assist students and teachers and educators and families? So the building capacity, that is a main assurance in all of our initiatives in the state is build capacity. But what does build capacity actually mean? And most importantly, how can we measure that it happened? And even more so, how do we know it made a positive impact to the kids sitting in our classrooms? So these are the key findings from the SELPA leads, that their building capacity first established on building a positive relationship and a positive environment. And we heard that through Kristen and her team at SIP this morning. It's about not having a separate classroom or a separate building or a separate program, but not being invited to the classroom, but creating a positive environment inclusive for all students. You can see significant length of time for learning. Oh, my apologies there. Significant length. Yes.
We're having a little bit of lag time with the Zoom. So if I could ask you to slow down your pace just a little bit so that our interpreters can keep up. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm freezing a little bit on my end, so hopefully that's not impacting your end. Okay. So again, I'll slow it down a little bit. Thank you, Commissioner Tostin. The building capacity key findings from the evaluation, again, significant length of time for learning. The trainings and the feedback we really received from the participants was that it wasn't a one and done training. It was a training that you could lay the foundation of the knowledge, but then you can also access folks to help you with coaching, consultation, diving deeper into the information. And that was one of the key findings is needed for sustainability and building capacity both. A part of that, again, is the coaching, but it's not only coaching in a boxed way, but it's tailored to people's needs. So if certain districts needed particular coaching in least restrictive environment or needed coaching in improvement science or continuous improvement, that was tailored to meet those districts' particular needs, wherever their entry point is in that educational level and need. The opportunity for collaboration and network was highlighted throughout the entire evaluation. It was one of the key components that you'll see across all of the evaluation measures. That, again, we can't do this work alone. We can't work in silos, especially in the field of special education. We are better together and collaborating with our partners, both throughout specialized services and content areas. So that was pretty apparent. Also, one of the things that shined out was practice opportunities, not only to have resource and tools, but have an opportunity to utilize and put in action those resource and tools in the classroom. And then have coaching support to say, how did that go? How did it work for you? Either at the LEA level or through one of these lead initiative supports. And of course, as we heard again, referencing SIP's presentation, it's leadership. And it comes down to leadership and mindset. And if the mindset is that we can make a difference, we can grow and continuously improve, we can track data to show what we're doing is working for our students. And that leadership really fosters that mindset and that continuous improvement model that is happening in our school sites. Okay. So the other areas, again, there were 5 areas. The other one is impact. So how do we know if we're making an impact? How do we know if the SELPA lead initiatives made an impact with the state's investments to help kids? So the main thing is continuous improvement tools and strategies. Like they were able to help folks with a continuous improvement mindset, identifying what their assets are, what their strengths are, and then identifying what their barriers are. And then what tools or strategies or resources do we need to address those barriers? And again, how does it all relate back to your LCAP goals? So we're not working in isolation just on one particular subgroup of population, but how does that transfer to what is already happening in the district? So we're not duplicating efforts unintentionally. The primary impact that we saw at the state level through all of the SELPA initiatives were a tremendous increased integration between special and general ed services and supports. And that's what we're striving to do. We have indicator 5 with least restrictive environment that measures the students in the general education environment. But this initiative really brought to light that the increased collaboration has been very apparent and very successful. That trainings aren't special education teachers and general teachers, they're teachers, and they're getting the training together. And you don't have to be invited or, this is a separate training, but we are all in this together. And we have that mindset that we're all in this together. And that has tremendously improved integration among the teaching staff as well. The second main outcome that came for impact out of the leads were higher quality IEP development, and not only development, but the implementation. So over time, you can see that more students were successfully progressing or meeting their IEP goals and objectives. If they were able to access resources, supports, their teachers were able to access resources, supports, and the leadership had the mindset of the collaborative nature that we're all working together to improve outcomes for kids. The third area was sustainability. And as we know, with the investment in the state resources, we can build a lot of resources. Through COVID, everyone was saying we're resource rich, but implementation poor. And we had a lot of great, fantastic resources. But then how do you leverage those resources to actually put them in action and improve student outcomes? And then what happens when the grant period is over? So we're really mindful in the statewide system to focus on sustainability beyond just the grant period term. So it's not just about the people who's in charge of the grants doing the work, but it truly is building capacity to have an impact that will sustain throughout the grant period and well beyond. So we can see a little bit of figures here. 93% of partners involved with a capacity building means that they were somehow involved with a SELPA lead that was charged with building their capacity at an LEA or county level, that they could continue to implement practices based on what they learned from the SELPA leads. That's huge. So 93% of them, yes, we got this training. We know continuous improvement mindset. They walked with us along this path. We were able to see the improvement in our students and our outcomes. And now we have the skills to go ahead and continue that work. And so that's really, really remarkable and a great accomplishment to the SELPA lead initiatives and the folks leading that work and the LEAs to continue the work. So there are practices specifically around sustainability that we found at the state level through this evaluation was, again, continuing to integrate special ed and general ed in not only professional development training, but how do we do it in actual classrooms, whether it's co-teaching model, who do we reach out to get support, not only initially, but throughout the way as, a community of practice. The other thing is analyzing data for decision making. That was a huge theme throughout our evaluation of the SELPA leads, was that LEAs are feeling more comfortable to analyze not only their local data, but their state data in all different sources, dashboard, their special ed indicator data, and really look at it as a holistic picture to see where are we doing really well, where are our assets, and where do we want to go for improvement? And then how do we create a problem of practice and target skills, strategies, and who do we reach out to in the system of support that can help us do that? Effective instructional practice obviously was highlighted as a theme throughout as well. And of course, the use of online tools and resources, a repository, so that they have the tools, they know where to go to get them, and they also have someone they can call if they need help in implementation of those tools. So sustainability was very high from regards to the SELPA leads. The last thing that we focused on was connections to the statewide system of support. So the SELPA leads and partners, as you can see, they cited their connections across the system as one of the supports that will and can continue to help with sustainability. And of course, if you ask one person, what is the statewide system of support? you may get different answers. Some people are like, I'm not quite sure what the statewide system of support is, or I think it's the geographic leads, or maybe it's the SELPA leads. Usually you're going to hear a response based on where that person's touch point into the system is, whether they were involved with supporting inclusive practices or system improvement leads. So really the goal is, through this evaluation data as well, is how can we create stronger collaboration networks, stronger connections at the state level, and really provide support to our lead initiatives to be able to do that in a more effective way and efficient way with the LEAs, based on what the LEAs are saying they need in analysis of their data as well. So a couple of quotes that I wanted to share with you that came directly from the evaluation, and this shows the impact. So this is, I love hearing about student stories, and when we're at the state level and we have these initiatives, we call it vertical alignment. How do we make sure the money that we're investing at the state and the support that we're providing is actually making a difference to a kid sitting in a chair? And it's harder at the state level to do that, but we're creating vertical alignment and through lines to be able to see those bright spots and identify those exemplar practices, similar to the demonstration sites that supporting inclusive practices were talking about earlier. So some quotes here, these are directly from practitioners in regards to them being supported by the SELPA lead initiatives. So you can see 6th to 7th grade can be a pretty pivotal time. A student was transitioning to a lesser restrictive environment. 6th grade student was able to complete a writing assignment for the first time ever, based on the support from the lead initiatives. A school district, so that's the student impact. A school district created a new system for training, coaching, and implementing evidence-based practices. And this one was even a little bit further expanded, that it was an integrated evidence-based system. It wasn't just focused on students' disabilities, but inclusive of students with disabilities. You can see someone created a demonstration site, so districts can attend as a model site on how we serve students with disabilities and inclusive sites. And finally, the last comment we pulled was the school now uses continuous improvement to help guide initiatives and show how the initiatives can complement each other as opposed to being siloed or in competition with each other. There's a lot of initiatives out there and a lot of resources. So it's really, how do we bring those together so the districts can seamlessly identify what they need when they need it and not be hindered by the different requirements of each one. Okay, the ongoing needs. As continuous improvement, as a CCEE is a state agency, we're always looking at how can we better serve the LEAs, right? Our charge is to really focus on LEAs with their LCAP goals. So based on the evaluation, we did ask folks through Research Triangle Institute, RTI, who did the evaluation for us, what will help in the future, right? We have great results. What's going to help to continue it? So again, continued access to resources consolidated on a site. This is one we're still hearing about today, is if I know who has supporting inclusive practices or where their website is, I go to them. If I know, SIL, which is System Improvement Leads, I can go to their website. But is there one place in California where people can go to get this information? Not right now, but we are working on it, which is what we're responding to the needs in the field. CCEE is creating an initiative inventory that will be a public database where you can search based on student group, keywords, special ed indicators, and it'll pull up all the universal resources available to you for free based on any initiatives in the statewide system of support, whether they're currently funded or previously funded, but they're evidence-based resources that are available. So we are currently building that through CCEE. Working with the California educators together now out of Kern County, seeing if we can utilize that website as a one-stop shop. And for special ed, we have CalTan, which there'll be a link in the presentation. I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but that's a special education website that Shiloh and the special ed division and her folks, along with the SELPA leads and now the special ed resource leads, curate their information. So we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. The other continued need from this evaluation was a statewide cadre of leaders that can just go and coach and provide TA. And we also are building that capacity through our special education resource leads. not only in the compliance improvement monitoring structure, but also as a proactive. So if a district says, I really need support in this, but it's not a wait till you fail model to get help, we're able to connect them with resources throughout the statewide system of support so that we can address the district's needs when they need it. Again, maintenance of website, that one was pretty glaring, as well as access for resources that are consolidated, and meaningful professional development. So again, ongoing professional development, coaching, tools, and implementation support of those tools. So we are taking those and we're looking at what we can do as far as in the statewide system of support in order to continue to address the needs of the field. So that is the evaluation part. So that's going to end that part. Again, happy to answer questions at the end of this presentation on any of that as well. But want to go ahead and continue from this. What we've learned from the SELPA evaluation is sustainability and impact is our focus. We see increased integration between special ed and general ed, both in the student level on inclusion, as well as the teacher level with professional development, training, curriculum training, those high standards, right? The system of support is really meant to identify assets that are working well, and also identifying barriers and eliminating those barriers to not only access, but implementation of strategies and resources. So in the next development of this, the SELPA leads, as I said, termed out June 2023 with my state agency partners, the California Department of Ed and the state board, put out a request for applications for special education resource leads. And this is the next reiteration to continue and build upon the evaluation that you just saw. So this was our charge in the Ed Code section. The previous one was open to just SELPAs. These next 5 years, it was open to county offices, SELPAs, and a consortium of either one of those. The charge was to select up to 10 leads. At least 3 had to focus on building capacity. At least 1 had to be a high-quality IEP lead. 1 had to be an alternative dispute resolution lead, and they must co-apply with a family support organization. Then through CDE and State Board and CCEE, we put out a statewide survey. And out of that survey, we got a glaring need that we need more universal design for learning support for students with disabilities and educators and paraprofessionals that help students with disabilities. And we also still continued to need an English language learner lead. So that was one that we put in, we meaning state agencies, in the RFA. So the selection process, so we have our leads, they're up and running. So this presentation that you received, you can see the assurances on the top is hyperlinked. That's the assurances for the building capacity leads. So if you want to know particularly what their assurances are, you can just feel free to click on that. So the building capacity leads that were selected by the state agencies was LA County Office of Ed, Santa Clara County Office of Ed, and then El Dorado County Office of Ed, along with Riverside SELPA and El Dorado SELPA. So El Dorado COE and SELPA and Riverside SELPA is somewhat of a continuation of the system improvement leads. And I've hyperlinked their website there as well. LACO and Santa Clara County Office of Ed are new resource leads, and they are both focusing on inclusion. So inclusion practices, how to build capacity in the area of inclusion. LACO really focusing on the population with significant needs. So how can we identify exemplar practices in the state of California in inclusive practices for serving students that historically may have been served in a different setting or not as so much in a general education setting? So that's their very unique charge. And Santa Clara County Office of Ed is focused on, again, inclusive practices and mindset and how to really support the county office and the regional level programs. So again, these leads just started, but people ask, well, we're focusing on inclusive practices for sure. That's where we selected the next 5 years for building capacity, but they're not doing it in isolation. So you just heard from supporting inclusive practices that obviously are doing amazing, amazing work in California for inclusive practices. We are bringing all of these leads together And we are not just working with our special ed resource leads. We are bringing SIP together with our resource leads. We are bringing ACSE, which is Early Childhood Special Ed, which is funded by the Special Ed Division at CDE. And we're bringing the Special Ed EWIG, Educator Workforce Investment Grant. We're bringing all of these together for all of our meetings because we cross over in so many ways. We want to make sure we're not unintentionally duplicating, but leveraging the great work that's happening so that we can reach more LEAs and more students. So those are the building capacity leads. The IEP best practices lead was selected by East County SELPA and Santa Clara County SELPAs. Santa Clara County SELPAs have multiple SELPAs, and so it's a consortium of all of the SELPAs in Santa Clara County, I believe, except one. And you can see that IEP best practices is not only just geared towards educators and administrators, but it's really how to create parent and family engagement strategies. Like I said, one of my adult children now had an IEP through school, and I was a special ed director. And it's similar to the San Bernardino with Juana. I knew the system and I knew how to get services, but I was still terrified sitting at that IEP meeting because you're talking about your most precious thing in this entire world to you as your child. And so how can we create strategies, engagement strategies where parents aren't invited to the table, but we are collectively making up the table? And an equally vitally important part is that parent voice as a student's first and foremost educator. So this IEP is going to not only be able to provide strategies for educators and teachers and students, but also families. Universal Design for Learning lead. The main lead selected was Placer County Office of Education. It's a somewhat of a continuation of their open access project from their SELPA lead. But they also co-applied to get statewide reach with Antelope Valley SELPA, which is in Los Angeles County, Humboldt County Office of Ed, which is a little bit south of me up here in Northern California, North Inland SELPA, and then, of course, Placer SELPA along with Placer County. And their UDL lead, again, is going to be working in collaboration with the SIP, who also does UDL, some trainings for UDL, as well as the Special Ed EWIG, which is primarily focused on UDL training for paraprofessionals and special educators. So we are bringing these folks all together to work in a collaborative way. Imperial County SELPA was selected. Again, they had the first SELPA lead for English learners. They are continuing with their grant on that. And I was just in a meeting with them this morning with our regional English language learner leads and looking for collaborative ways to leverage the work throughout the state. So it's not wait until a student gets identified or duly identified, but how can we really provide supports to LEAs? So potentially a student who is EL does not need to be identified for an IEP. But really it may be a language issue and not necessarily an over-identification and needing an IEP. Alternative dispute resolution lead, this was the one that was required to apply with a family support organization. And they applied Ventura SELPA and Tehama SELPA, along with Ventura County Office of Ed, applied with the Rainbow Connection Family Empowerment Center out of Ventura County. And they collectively are doing these are all statewide leads. And it's an alternative dispute resolution. So there really is focusing on not to wait until there's a dispute at an IEP level or a site level regarding the program or services for a student with an IEP, but how can we proactively engage the families and districts and teachers in a positive way so that we collectively are working together. And as you can see, these leads go hand in hand with the building capacity leads, with the IEP lead. They all cross over in some of their work, which is why we're very intentional in making sure that we're all very much collaborative in this process. So really excited about this. These resources are going to be provided not only to educators and leaders, but also to family empowerment centers throughout California. So those are the resource leads we have selected. They just started. We have our first in-person one coming up next week. And really, really excited to see where we're going and our focus on inclusive practices throughout all of these leads and family engagement. So another thing I want to share with you while we have a little bit of time here is the One System Collective. It's CCEE's One System Collective, and this is about a year ago. We created an executive advisory board. If you click on that link in your PowerPoint, it'll take you to the members of that. And really, it's focusing on one system. How do we get to one system of education? So it's not about a special education system or a general ed. It is one system. And really, that's building upon the work of the Special Education Task Force that happened back in 2015, building still upon those principles and those research. As you saw in SIP's presentation, the research is standing the test of time, that inclusive practices are a better outcome for students, not only while they're in school, but beyond school. And so we're building upon those same principles that we know are true and that we're seeing in our schools. The first thing we did is identify the strengths and barriers in accessing resources in the system of support. And then we created a plan of action to address those barriers. Part of that I alluded to was we're creating an initiative inventory where, again, anyone can access universal resources whenever they need it in one spot. And those resources will be updated as they are developed and curated. CCEE also does a monthly huddle, which we established. So we take a representative from the statewide system of support leads. We report not only what's happening and trainings that are coming up in the next month, but looking for ways for meaningful collaboration and integration of work. So a perfect example just recently with the Educator Workforce Investment Grant. Sorry guys, I keep pushing those. Educator Workforce Investment Grant, we have 3 of those in the state of California. We have a special education one, we have a computer sciences, and we have an English learner one. So with EWIG, they're all tasked on building the capacity and training for paraprofessionals and educators in their respective areas. So we are talking about how we can integrate the EWIGs to really look at how can we provide a training that integrates students with disabilities, UDL, how to provide UDL services in a general ed classroom for all students, using computer science and also strategies for English language learners. So that's one example of how we're coming together. Another example out of the huddle was integrating the DA or differentiated assistance along with the SIM, which is a coordinated or compliance improvement monitoring system. Right now we have DA on the general ed and we have the SIM on the special ed indicators. And we really were mindful in the system improvement leads to really work with the geographic leads on how can we really blend and braid these two systems that we know we need to respond to. They all have their different timelines and requirements, but there are some similarities and overlap, and we don't want to just crank out plan after plan without meaningful implementation to the student. So that was a result also out of the All Leads huddle of how we can cross collaborate. And also it provides, the One System Collective provides a continuous feedback to us at the state agency level of what we're needing in the field and how can we as state agencies help support them to provide them resources and, most importantly, access and equity for those resources. This is one example of, I'm probably dating myself, but I call it a Rolodex, and some of my younger colleagues have no idea what I'm talking about, but we call these little Rolodex cards. And this is an example of a 21 CSLA, and we update these every month at our huddle meetings. So this one was from the end of the year for 21 CSLA. But with personnel changing, we make sure we have the right emails, we have resources, upcoming events, and of course the area of emphasis. So every lead in the statewide system of support has a Rolodex, I call it Rolodex card like this. And these are what we're turning into the searchable database. So everyone in the field has this information. The other thing out of the One System Collective that we're really proud to announce we've been working on last year that just got launched in June of 2023 was the Levers for System Change. Currently, there's the Basics tool, which is used fantastic and extensively in the intensive monitoring process. Or if you're a special education director or superintendent and you really want to take a deep dive into your special education program, there's the basics components of special ed infrastructure, which is hyperlinked on the slide. That one is being used, and it's being used incredibly well to analyze your assets and your needs in your special ed system. So what we did in the mindset of one system, we took that, meaning the one system collective took that, and we created it so it's an entire LEA kind of self-assessment, inclusive of special ed. So if you are a new site principal, or if you are a district leader or a special ed director, you can take the self-assessment with folks from your LEA, and it will tell you what areas you're doing really well in and what areas do you really want to prioritize and create goals for. And this is not just for special ed, but it's inclusive of your entire LEA program. Special ed is embedded in it as well. So that is launched, and it's hyperlinked on there as well. The other thing as far as CCE is we kicked off a leadership institute for small and rural leaders. Again, I'm up here in Del Norte County. We have 32 districts, and the largest one has 4,000 students. So small and rural, typically a lot of folks wear superintendent / principal / bus / sub teacher on certain days. And so we really identified a need that they need specialized kind of leadership development and training to their unique needs. So this is the second year going through it. And the cohort 1 last year was extremely successful and said, yes, we want to continue this. So we brought on some new LEAs and leading that. And you can see some of the session topics. The special education one is the one I do for the Leadership Institute for those small and rural school leaders. And then finally, as I wrap up my time with you before questions, I just want to make sure I talked about a couple of these resources already. Just want to make sure you had them available and were aware of them. The ACSE, you saw Chair-elect Turner there earlier from the State SELPA Association. He is one of the leads in the ACSE, which is direct funded by Special Ed CDE Division. CalTAN also was mentioned. That's right now a one-stop shop for special education resources. That, again, is curated by CDE Special Ed Division. California Educators Together Now is out of Kern County in collaboration with CCEE, and that is high-quality instructional resources. So there's lesson plans, there's scope and sequence plans, there's webinars, everything's archived on there, and they do have quite a bit of information and resources for serving students with disabilities. And then, of course, CCE. If you're not signed up for our listserv, that's how we get information out to the field about the system of support and the offerings. So we included our website down there as well. And that is a lot of talking on my part. So I am going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Commissioner Tostin.
Mindy, thank you so much for all the information you shared and the depth that you were able to go in a short time frame. As we begin lining up on the dais for comments or questions, I'd just like to draw our attention to the key findings slide from the evaluation, and knowing there's an external researcher who did the evaluation, and as we review those 9 components, that's a good quality learning environment. And as I said earlier, thinking about the network of county offices and special education local plan areas who are learning from the work of the systems leads, not only the content that they provide, but also the learning that we're receiving from recipients and attendees in the various different sessions that inform the work locally as well. So Mindy, thank you for highlighting that and calling that out for us. Any questions, comments? Commissioner Hamilton?
Thank you for this great presentation. Clearly, you have a lot on your plate and cover a lot of ground, and it's really impressive to see all the work that's going on. I'm also thrilled to see all of the themes of inclusion and UDL woven through all of the different varying resource leads. I am curious about, I think I remember there was previously a resource lead for AAC and assistive technology, and I'm wondering if there will be that moving forward as the parent of a non-speaking child who relies heavily on assistive technology, and seeing how we need more leadership in that area to ensure all non-speaking students have communication access. Just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And definitely communication competencies are a huge part of the system of support. And so, yes, they will continue. Placer County Office of Ed received the Universal Design for Learning grant, who previously had the same grant as well as those AAC and AT supports. Those are now embedded in the UDL strategies. So any district that needs those supports and services will definitely continue to receive those trainings and ongoing support.
That's even better. Thank you.
Of course.
Other comments, questions? Very thorough, Mindy. So you covered it all. So I will ask for the slide for public comment to be displayed, and any members of the public in the room who would like to make a comment, we ask that you begin lining up now. First public comment from Chair-elect Scott Turner, State SELPA Association.
Red button. Is that on? There we go. Good afternoon again, Commissioners. Scott Turner from SELPA Administrators of California. Okay. Scott Turner from SELPA Administrators of California. Just want to really show the association's support for exactly what was expressed about ensuring access to resources and technical assistance and the integration and the larger statewide system of support, as well as it aligns with LCAP and other actions related for our students with disabilities. It is a segue that our association this year sponsored a bill, AB 1517, and the bill is in the Senate Appropriations Committee. I believe there's 2 hearings coming up, 21st and 28th. So there is ongoing advocacy to try to see that bill make its way out of appropriations and hopefully have success in getting signed by the governor. Among other things, it wants to leverage what is known as the Annual Assurances Support Plan that currently will be a template developed by CDE by July 1 of 2026 and then implemented by 2027. Initially, the bill wanted to kind of push that forward. There's been some amendments, and it's still on the same timelines that existed in Ed Code 26 and 27. But among other things that Annual Assurances Support Plan would do would create conversations at the Superintendent's Council level, the Governance Council of a SELPA, specifically to how their agencies are accessing the new special education resource leads and other technical assistance in the state. So having those transparent conversations at the local level based upon the needs at that local level in better outcomes for our students. It also, previously, the Ed Code tied it a lot into LCAP. So again, trying to integrate those systems that exist in our state. So just want to thank Mindy Fattig for the thorough presentation, and we're in full support of trying to use these resources to have better outcomes for our students. Thank you.
That will conclude public comment in the room. Are there any online public comments?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. We will close online public comment. And with that, we move into the next item on our agenda, item 4, I believe. We'll be taking a break between 2:30 and 2:45, and we will see everyone back online at 2:45 for item 5, a presentation from the Government Affairs Division of the Department. Thank you all. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from our most recent break. We are excited to continue the conversation. And to remind everyone, this was part of our, learning goal as a commission from the last meeting. Many of us are appointed by, or all of us are appointed by, a different state agency, and we have a responsibility to advise all 5 of the appointing bodies. And so using this opportunity to not review how a bill becomes a law necessarily, but to understand the roles and responsibilities of the different governing agencies and develop a deeper understanding around how they intersect and where our advice is most useful based on the role and charge of each of those entities. And so we're very pleased to have with us the presenter, Michelle Warshaw, the Legislative Representative for the Government Affairs Division with the California Department of Education. Michelle, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I will turn the presentation over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Michelle Warshaw, Legislative Representative at the California Department of Education. And I was asked, as was mentioned, I was asked to come here today to discuss the roles of the different state agencies. And this is actually my first time presenting to all of you, so thank you so much for having me. And just one quick logistical question. I know that most of you are there in person. Do I need to share the slide deck on my side, or is it being shared via the boardroom?
It's being shared via the boardroom so we can see your presentation.
Perfect. Then I don't have to worry about trying to do that at the same time. So thank you. So yes, I'm here from Government Affairs and here to provide some updates. So just an outline of some of the things I'm going to go over today, providing just a general overview of where we are in the legislative process, just to kind of ground you in where we are timing-wise. I'm then going to review some education partners and government entities that may be organizations and groups that your commission interacts with, but we are all distinct and have different roles in the process to help provide that additional context and understanding. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So just to ground us in where we are right now, we are the 2023-2024 legislative session. We are in the first year of a 2-year session. So what that means is that if there are bills that die this year or get held in a certain committee this year, they could still continue next year. So just for your awareness, if you think something got held and isn't continuing, it could still continue next year. So we are in the first of that 2-year session. I have included on here 2 links to legislative deadlines for you. It provides an overview of every single deadline throughout the 2-year session, but I'm just going to highlight a few for you right now that are applicable to where we are. And I'm also just going to pause for a minute, so that way, if you are reading the slide, you can read the slide instead of having to look back and forth between the interpreter and the slide deck. So I'm just going to pause for a minute. So to ground us, we are just finished up summer recess, and the legislature just reconvened on Monday. They took a month off for legislative recess. So right now what is happening are appropriations committees, or fiscal committees. So bills are being evaluated based on their cost and whether or not we have money in the budget for them. This will occur until September 1st. At that time, if bills pass, they will then move on to floor sessions. So since we're already in the second house, assembly bills will be heard on the Senate floor and Senate bills will be heard on the assembly floor. On September 14th will be the last day for each house to pass bills. And then from there, it goes to the governor's desk, and he has 1 month to sign or veto bills. And some of the entities and education partners that I'm going to review today include the CDE, California Department of Education, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, State Board of Education, California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE, and finally, local educational agencies. So California Department of Education, we are a state agency in California responsible for administering federal and state education programs. And there are 2 slides just to warn you if you're like, oh, there's only 4 things for responsibilities. That's not true. There are 2 slides, but just to outline some of the responsibilities of CDE includes ensuring LEA compliance, local educational agency, compliance with applicable state and federal laws, providing technical assistance and fiscal estimates to legislative staff, allocating funding based on various formulas, compiling and disseminating data on LEAs, students, and staff, overseeing development of curriculum frameworks, instructional materials, standardized student assessments, and school facility standards, and oversee county offices of education. So CDE, I mean, hopefully in all of your roles, you've interacted with different divisions at the department to kind of get an understanding of what it is that we do and some various roles that we play with the legislative process, as well as just generally in the state education system. So the interesting thing is that California is only one of 10 states that has an elected official in charge of their education department. Most states, their head of their state educational department is actually appointed by the governor. So California is unique in that way, in that our state superintendent of public instruction is an elected official. So the SSPI is an elected state official that is elected to serve a 4-year term and can serve up to 2 years. So as all of you know, our current state superintendent of public instruction is Tony Thurmond. He has already completed one of his terms and is currently serving his 2nd term. And some of the superintendent's responsibilities include managing the CDE, serving as an executive officer to the State Board of Education. And something else I want to mention is because he's an elected official, he is also able to advocate for changes in education policy by sponsoring or supporting or even opposing bills. So here, for our agency at least, the superintendent can take positions on bills. The California Department of Education cannot. So I'm sure you see news articles or get press releases where it talks about bills that the superintendent is championing. That is because he is an elected official. So Superintendent Thurmond has bills that he is working on and championing and taking positions on. Whereas if you remember on the previous slides, the department serves in more of a technical assistance capacity. And we partner with the superintendent and help inform him on various initiatives. But a lot of our role in the legislative process is more technical. The superintendent also serves on various boards and commissions in his role. Next, the State Board of Education, or SBE. The State Board of Education is part of the administration. So what I mean by that is that it is connected to the governor and the governor's administration. They are not appointed by the superintendent. In fact, they are appointed by the governor. So this SBE is the governing and policy-making body for the state. There are 10 members that are appointed by the governor, and they serve 4-year terms. The state board also has a high school student that is appointed to a 1-year term. SBE has different responsibilities set forth by law as well as California Constitution, and it includes appointing various staff upon the nomination of the superintendent. The SBE also adopts textbooks as well as rules and regulations for governance. They approve statewide academic standards, assessments, frameworks, and instructional materials. They can grant waivers. They review various petitions, including for charter schools, as well as district reorganization. They ensure compliance with the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, So if you've been involved in hearing about ESSA or an ESSA state plan, the CDE works with the State Board of Education on that. They also approve funding allocations and study the educational needs and conditions of the state. The next entity is the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, or CCEE. And this is actually a unique entity because it is not part of the CDE, technically. It is not part of the administration, technically. It is its own entity that was established by the legislature and the governor during the LCFF, or local control funding formula legislation, with the goal of advising and assisting LEAs in achieving their LCAP goals, or local control accountability plans. So I don't have a lot of slides on the responsibilities. This entity is not one that I personally work with very closely. But it is an entity that does play a role in what we work on here at the department, and is probably an entity that all of you work with in your roles on the commission. So just some of their responsibilities includes making sure that LEAs have enough support for students, and they also operate resource centers to support LEAs, making sure that they're reaching their LCAP goals, and implement a statewide system of support. And lastly, I want to discuss local educational agencies, which is one I'm sure you're all familiar with, but of course is worth mentioning and thinking about our California education system and the roles of different entities. So California is a local control state, and a lot of decisions and what happens in schools is determined at the local level. So our local educational agencies and our county offices of education are critical and instrumental in how education is implemented throughout California. And a local educational agency is a local entity focused on education. So it isn't necessarily an individual school. It includes a county office, a school district, a direct funded charter school, and occasionally SELPAs. And I say occasionally because depending on the type of provision, or depending on which section, local educational agencies can be defined differently. So it is important to know, depending on the context, if it is considered an LEA or not. Some of the responsibilities of LEAs include providing educational services to students, supporting students, teachers, and families, and implementing programs and standards outlined in state and federal legislation. And I'm sure I could make an entire PowerPoint presentation just on everything that LEAs do, but just wanted to provide some high-level information to help structure and how LEAs differ than some of the other entities I talked about. And we do have some time for questions. So I don't know how it works since I'm virtual. If there are questions in person, will they just be on the screen, or?
Yeah. So, Michelle, if there are questions in the room, obviously we'll go around the dais, and I don't anticipate maybe comments from the public, but we'll center our conversation here, and so we'll open the floor for questions, and I'll ask commissioners to begin queuing up with your hands. Michelle, thank you so much for the efficiency in covering lots of ground in detail, and it's been very helpful for me in understanding, and remembering there's the federal government, and then there's what happens within California and CDE's role in implementing federal mandates and charges, for example, the IDEA. and how that intersects with all of our governing agencies and bodies, where there may be some alignment in our laws and statutes and approaches sometimes with the federal regulations, and times where there's not apparent alignment with what's happening at a federal level. And so thank you for bringing that point into the conversation. And again, one of the reasons we wanted to have this on the agenda, our primary goal is to advise. And so recognizing, sending advice to the Department of Education related to funding, not in their lane. They may influence that, or the state superintendent might influence, a bill related to funding, but the Department of Education, as I understand it, not responsible for the distribution of dollars. And so understanding where we can target not our advocacy, but our advice related to our strategic plan will be important for our work going forward. So, Michelle, thank you for illuminating all the different connections. I will pull back and see Commissioner comments, questions.
I just want to say thank you. That was so clear. And for a layperson like me, I really needed just kind of the visual and just the explanation you gave. It really, I've been trying to sort all of this in my head whenever I read things. And so now I have a reference point. And now that Shiloh and team, the CD, gave us that nice little virtual Bible, binder to put it in, I have now a reference point that's really, really clarified things. So I just wanted to say thank you and great presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. Like, whoa, what did I do here? Okay. All right, it's a lot better now. Shall you see that? Can you hear me? Okay. You mentioned that our state is a local control, has a policy of local control, and I agree with that. But I was wondering if you have a source or like a citation to it, or is there a statute out there that says that our state is devoting ourselves to local control?
That's a really good question. That is a term that I use because of our funding structure. So we use, local control funding formula to allocate funds, and funds go to county offices of education, who then distribute the funds to school districts and charter schools, et cetera. And a lot of our policies and responsibilities lie with the county offices. So looking at education code and seeing the different kinds of responsibilities that COEs have versus what authority the CDE has is why we'll say that it's a local control state. I don't know if technically there's something that says, like something like you're saying, like a specific reference point that says California is a local control state or is not. It's just something that, or the reason that I use that term is because of the types of roles that the CDE has versus county offices. But I can look into if there is a specific law, or perhaps there's something a little bit more straightforward in statute, and I can send that to our CDE folks to distribute, if that's helpful.
Yes, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I guess I suppose since you mentioned LCF, local control funding formula, before local control funding formula was the law for distributing funds, did we not have local control? I don't know what it was. Maybe it was back with Governor Brown the second time that LCFF came about.
So before LCFF, we had categorical funding. So what that looked like is that the state determined specific pots of funds to be used for very specific uses. So instead of saying, hey, here's one lump sum, make a plan, determine what it is that are the needs of your community. Instead, it was you get this much amount of funding for art, you get this much amount of funding for math, you get this much amount of funding for, et cetera, et cetera. There's still some levels of like accountability that were more at the state level, so like API scores or academic performance index scores, not quite as holistic as the dashboard, for example. But in terms of like, I don't know how to say this, like compliance, like there are certain things that the CDE is responsible for monitoring compliance. But like, for example, some things that I've heard is, oh, well, why can't CDE just make them do that? Like we can't make somebody do something, right? There are laws that are set forth. We can help clarify the laws, provide guidance. We don't have the authority to make somebody do something, if that makes sense. But yes, pre-LCFF, I don't know if what we were technically considered at that time. I wasn't working in education at that time, but there was definitely still some local control, but definitely a lot more state control than there is now.
Great, thank you. I look forward to the source of us being a local control state. Thank you in advance.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I just Googled it. And in the CDE website, there is reference to us having a permissive education code, and it talks about local control there. So it's on the CDE site. Do you know if it's a policy? It says that in 1972, the Constitution was amended, and so that the general rule that you're only allowed to do what is authorized by statute. There's an exemption for local schools, and it doesn't say the specific reference here, but it just says under this permissive education code, as long as a statute does not prohibit a program or activity and it is consistent with the purpose for which the school districts are established, it can be undertaken. It is constitutionally unnecessary to enact any statutes that merely allow or permit school districts at their discretion to do something. So I'm just reading from the CDE site. So thank you. Sure. That's very helpful.
Well, and also in practice, I mean, the local control accountability plan, local control funding, and what we know to be true in terms of centering our plans around the priorities of the local community through the process, I think demonstrates some of the policy commitments and obviously the conversations at the state board that focus on the local control or the implementation of that policy and how we center it around, again, the needs of our community to drive the decisions we are making or LEAs are making to achieve the goals and expectations of the funding, whether within the framework of the state. I'm not an attorney or a policymaker. I'm simply talking through a meeting, so I just want to give that quick disclaimer, and I think that's true of all of us. Sorry. Yeah, so my last comments that were not captured by the microphone, we were all sharing our beliefs around the implementation of the local control policy in California and recognizing none of us are official policy experts or developers, so. Any other comments on the dais? Thoughts, reflections? Michelle, while we have you, you referenced county offices. Is it fair to say we've focused on state governance, we've talked about LEA responsibilities, and intermediate public agencies like county offices have specific roles assigned in statute, and those leaders, I'll ask you to confirm, can be either elected or appointed, and the majority of the superintendents of county offices in California are elected positions. I believe there are 5 to 7 that may be appointed, but that's going to be by local jurisdiction. Is that a fair summary or a fairly accurate, close to accurate summary, Michelle?
Yep. You've got it.
So multiple layers, and in my experience, At an LEA level, there's frustration with the information that received from the county office. County offices tend to be frustrated by information received from the state and then the feds. And so recognizing all of the intricate relationships and mandates are part of the experience of educators and leaders in the field, special ed and general ed, and appreciate our commitment to continue to, as we've heard, create one system across all of those levels that are focused on community voice and student needs is a significant change, I think, from at least at the start of my experience as a public educator and as a parent in the system. And so, Michelle, thank you so much for highlighting the kind of the state structure and giving us some direction as we continue our role and move forward. So I will pause there and ask for the slide for public comments for those online. And anyone in the room wishing to make public comment, will ask you to line up at the podium. Seeing no members of the public wishing to make a comment in the room, we will transition to online. Are there any public comments online?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you very much. Michelle, on behalf of the Commission, thank you so much for the information. We all look forward to our next conversation with you in the future. Please have a good afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. And I definitely look forward to presenting to this group in the future. And I wrote down on my sticky note to follow up with some of the local control history for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so just doing a quick time check, our next item was intended to start at 3:30. We're within a 15-minute window, so if it doesn't give anyone too much heartburn, we'll just continue to move it through the agenda. All right. So we're moving on to item 6, talking about an update of our strategic plan and the report from the Policy and Ledge Committee. And I just want to acknowledge Vice Chair Groff could not attend with us today. She's in a location that has unstable internet. And so we appreciate her contributions before the meeting and thank Commissioner Notch for kind of taking it on solo.
Thank you. Hello, commissioners. I think by my calculations, I now have an extra 15 minutes. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. This will really be, we wanted to dive in a little more deeply than we have in our previous committee report outs, because we've been doing a lot of work around changing our approach with the Legislative and Policy Committee to create broader impact. And we've also had a lot of conversations about how can we unify and sort of leverage collectively to amplify not just the impact that we're having with direct legislation and policy development, but as a body, being a leader and a voice in the state on behalf of students with disabilities and their families. So in the virtual binder, there's a folder for item 6. And I wanted to give you copies of some of the documents that we've referred to in Report Out, briefly go over our logic model theory of action, and talk about how it's changed since the evolution of it. So you'll see version 1, and then I'll talk through some of the changes. Review our priority areas and goals, and then zoom in on a couple of questions, guiding questions in our equity rubric, applying those to our priority areas and goals, and then finally close with a discussion about how we can consistently and more deeply communicate with our liaison partners. Some of this work will continue into committee tomorrow, but knowing that many of you will also be in committee meetings at the same time, wanted to give an opportunity for feedback so that could be included in tomorrow's work. So jumping straight into the logic model theory of action, we looked at what resources we have available to us. So as commissioners, we're a tremendous resource. We hear from the public. We have our state agency partners. We look at the legislative platform using our equity rubric. There are many of our state partners who have even presented today are great resources. And then we have our annual report. So collectively, those things, if we can unify them and unify our conversations, will help us leverage those resources most effectively in order to position ourselves as leaders in the field and voice across the state. When we were thinking about our, did this go? Oh, there it is. When we were thinking about our outputs, we have a couple of activities, and there are, of course, limitations with Bagley-Keene and not being able to convene special meetings and communication restrictions. So wanting to make sure that we're very much aligned with what our responsibilities are. Our activity options are ACSE meetings, so anything that happens within the meeting, communication between the Ledge and Policy Committee co-chairs, as well as our communications individually with our liaisons. And what we were really looking for was evidence that those activities produced in-time advisement on legislation and policy development. What we were realizing after we put this beautiful document together is that the cycle of our meetings and the cycle, the legislation cycle, do not fit together beautifully. And we were not seeing an opportunity to provide in-time advisement. So we were primarily reactive in our approach initially. We thought we would see what's happening, what bills are being introduced, let's monitor those, let's communicate on behalf of the commission through Ledge and Policy about our thoughts on those bills, but we just weren't hitting the right timeline. So what we wanted to do in changing that up was switch to a more proactive approach where instead of letting the bills lead and we follow, we switch it to let the issues lead and our voice lead, and then have that help to advise on the development of legislation and policy. And so in anticipating potential issues, identifying gaps that might exist, and ways that we can early on identify issues that are important to us as a commission, and then use those priority areas in our communications with liaisons as we're building the agenda, in our annual report. It will really help position ACSE as having a loud, important, impactful voice. This is a lot of talking. Are you guys okay so far? Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving to, there's a document called ACSE Legislative and Policy Committee Priorities, Goals, and Actions. So if you look at that, and again, we've spoken about this briefly, but this is it for you in one place right now. Each of our priority areas that we identified has a goal attached to it. So that's the setup. So our first priority area is prioritize the perspectives and amplify the voices of students and their families. And our goal attached to that is purposefully outreach and support to increase the involvement of students and their families with ACSE. We know we'll be able to start that with our new commissioners who are joining us, but even more broadly, want to make sure that that's front and center in our work. The second priority area is in implementing community schools, include, consider, and commit to the needs of students with disabilities, with the goal attached being advocate for a culture of inclusivity and belonging for all students in the conceptualization and development of community schools, ensuring its representation and promotion in all agencies and LEAs. The next priority area is increase the availability and quality of services related to social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health. And I know Commissioner Estes isn't here today, but the Mental Health Committee has also been talking about wanting to achieve the same goals, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was one of the major influences for us developing this more aligned strategic plan. The next goal is broaden the application of practices that are equitable and inclusive for every student, with the goal being regularly apply an equity-focused approach to maintaining the least restrictive environment, fostering genuine inclusion, encouraging significant participation, and making data-based decisions. And then our final priority area for the year is boost literacy proficiency among students with disabilities. The goal being promote and highlight innovative, effective, exemplary programs and resources available within the statewide system of support. So I want to pause, share some airtime, and if anyone has any reflections, I know we've gone through these priority areas, just want to do a check in the room and make sure that they still seem aligned with discussions we've had, that the goals attached make sense, that you can see relevance in your work with your liaison partners, as well as your work as a commissioner in hearing and requesting presentations. Just looking for any feedback that someone might want to offer.
I'm on a roll today. I just thank you for the work that you're doing and putting it out for us to have available. And as a refresher, I love that you've reorganized that flow chart in the beginning so that we can actually have some impact, because I love that what we do here, but I've always waited to see when we were going to be doing more, like, I don't want to say advocacy, I guess advising, actual active advising, and I think now we can do it when we switch it around a little bit. So I love the change in mindset for that. And then I just wanted to point out that for that last priority for literacy, to turn around and say that today's Goal Award recipient, I think we did a good job in finding a group to really highlight that. And so we want to congratulate them again. And thank you.
I just wanted to quickly say thank you for all the work that the legislative and policy community has put into this, because it's clearly very well thought out and organized, and it gets me fired up for doing what we do. So thank you.
And I was just going to add that when we look at the 5 goal areas, it really is inclusive to all students with disabilities. It doesn't matter which type of disability. And because we do hear that a lot from our parent phone calls. So I do like that we've done that.
I also appreciate that. I mean, while we have goals or priorities and goals, they are very broad and expansive. So just because it's not explicitly called out, like teacher credentialing, we know that our partners who are in the classroom and our other service providers are a key part to achieving improved student outcomes, and so that doesn't prohibit us from keeping tabs on and inviting the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to provide updates, or the IEP template group, or all the various other task force and committees that are doing work as well across the state. And I also wanted to highlight, going back to our annual report and our presentation from Michelle, where she talked about the legislature coming back online right now. And we publish our annual report in August, and so we will be communicating as everything is coming online for this next session. Here are the priorities that we have identified in areas we want to be directly supportive of, and signal that we'll be tracking on this. So, for example, the State Superintendent Thurman's literacy initiatives and goals. That is going to be obviously a central part of our conversations, similar to community schools and understanding the priorities of our appointing bodies, as well as hearing from our liaisons or our statewide partners, how they are focusing on these areas as well within their work, or barriers that they may be experiencing as they try and move towards, improved outcomes or broader dissemination of resources. So question, I can't remember, did we adopt these last time?
I believe we did. I'm checking my math in my head.
There was a lot going on last meeting, so.
We do have, well, I have a couple more things, but we do have this listed as action, so we could always double adopt if we need to. Okay. Thank you so much for that feedback and the input. I'm also very fired up and excited to get going on all of this. The last two things I wanted to do today, and then again, we'll continue into committee tomorrow. So anyone who's not in a different committee meeting at the time, I invite you to come join us. I wanted to look at just a couple of key questions on our equity rubric. So that's another document you should have. Is the title is ACSE. Oh no, Disability Equity Rubric. So this was, I don't know when, it predates me, adopted by the commission. Do you have historical knowledge, Chair Tostin?
Thanks for calling me out for that.
You were nodding.
Because I was here, it was 2019, I believe, is when we readopted this platform. And it was an iteration of a previous document, and so we want to just make sure we're all aware that it's not set in granite, and that we can obviously continue the conversation and amend and update as necessary.
Excellent. Thank you. So thinking with the lens of our 5 priority areas, which I'll simplify into student and family voice, community schools, social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health, equitable and inclusive practices, and literacy proficiency for students with disabilities. So thinking about those 5, wanted to ask some of the questions to get any feedback if we think that there's misalignment or excellent alignment with our equity rubric. The first is focusing on those priority areas. Will it reduce disparities or discrimination? And we don't have to chime in on everything, but if anyone wants to. The next question is, will these priority areas advance equity and inclusion? Seeing nods. Okay, and then the last 3 that I wanted to talk about is a lead-in to our work with our liaison partners. So with these 5 priority areas, have stakeholders from different groups been informed, meaningfully involved, and authentically represented in the development of our priority areas? And that leads to a larger discussion, I think, Chair Tostin, about our liaison partners, which we'll get into more tomorrow. Okay. So if you could really think about that, and if you have anything to offer today, welcome that input, but really want to make sure that if there are missing groups aligned with these priority areas that we should be engaging with regularly and meaningfully, that we identify them so that as we are developing our new liaison partnerships, we have those entities in mind. Don't know if anything's springing top of mind, looking around. Okay, so that's homework to think about. And then the final question is, what are our success indicators and project progress benchmarks, and how will our impacts be documented and evaluated? So going back to our original logic model theory of action, where our impact was measured by in-time advisement, and knowing that that wasn't going to be able to come to fruition given our cycle and scheduling, how are we moving into our updated theory of action going to be able to identify and measure and evaluate our progress? If our voices are loud enough, if our partnerships are strong enough, what will that look like? How will we know? So that's a big part of the discussion that will happen tomorrow. Another thing we'll do tomorrow is go through a discussion about, should we have guiding questions not overly formalized, but just to help ensure consistency based on our priority areas that we're using in conversations ongoing with our liaison partners, so that as you're bringing information back from your liaison and communicating in two ways and letting them know about our priorities, it gives us a broader scope of our partners' priorities in the field, as well as is a consistent message about ACSE's priorities too, so making that more visible. So I'll pause here again for any questions, any suggestions?
I just want to say I like the idea of that last point you had about having, sorry. I just want to say I like that last point about having some kind of guidance in our communications with the liaisons to have consistency. And for some of us, we need a little bit of support anyway. And like, what is it that we're sharing and what information do we want to bring back? Having that information doesn't have to be, like you said, not super formal maybe, but just some kind of guidance that we can all use. Thank you.
Well, and I think as we continue to think about how we communicate externally, we've obviously talked about our annual report. Maybe there are other communication channels we can consider in terms of individual contributions from commissioners through various other newsletters and platforms that we can coordinate together to achieve, again, a purpose, not just communicating to communicate. And so how we further our conversations outside of the meeting with different communication channels, but also our presence. I mean, as we were talking today, many of us in different circles attend various different conferences and are engaging with different public agencies. How can we be equipped with here are the 5 talking points, and here's who we're representing and how we want to learn, so that we can, again, amplify messages from the field and those experiences, so that we're not limiting our perspective to the 14 of us, but what we're hearing from our parents, our students, as well as our public agencies.
Thank you all so much. I apologize for all of the talking, but I'm grateful to have been given time to go over this in greater depth, because it really is beyond just the Legend and Policy Committee. It's amplifying everything, and I share all of your enthusiasm and excitement and drive. I know we've had lots of discussions about our motivations for joining the commission and wanting to create impact, and I'm hoping that when we finalize this, it will help us all achieve that. So appreciate the time, and feel free to join us in committee tomorrow.
One suggestion, I mean, as I look at the disability equity guidelines that, again, adopted in 2019, and recognizing everything that we do represents our best thinking at that moment, and just I think what we may have learned about equity since 2019, it may be a good time and window for us to consider updating these guidelines and, being far more expansive in our language, instead of limiting it just to, disability equity guidelines. Equity is equity. And so just identifying areas we want to update and maybe shape with additional understanding and experiences that I think we've all collectively been through since 2019. I think there was a small global pandemic that happened there. There were some other things going on, and so just really making sure that we, like you said, in time advisement, are able to make sure that all of our approaches continue to not be innovative but stay current and contemporary with the conversations that we're having now.
We can definitely tackle a language refresh and bring that back, and thinking about how we would have to take action on adopting updates. It's reminding me that we were considering taking action on officially adopting the priority areas as a backup plan, just in case we didn't already do it.
Yes. So is there a motion on the floor to adopt the goals and priorities as we reviewed today for the 23-24 school year? Would someone be willing to make that motion?
I motion to adopt to whatever you just said, the goals and I lost you after that.
I think I hear you saying that you're moving that we adopt the goals.
Yes,
and
I move it.
priorities.
Yes. Yes, you heard me right. There you go.
And I second.
Say the whole sentence.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Topalian to adopt the goals and priorities for ACSE for the 23-24 school year, which has been seconded by Commissioner Hamilton. Pause and call for any additional discussion. Seeing none, we will ask for our teammates at CDE to facilitate the roll call vote.
So bear with me, I haven't done this before. Is it just calling out names?
Yeah, if you just go through each commissioner name and we'll respond in the affirmative
Okay.
or the negative, or we can abstain.
Okay, thank you. Chair Tostin?
Yes.
Commissioner Estes? Not here. Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes.
Commissioner Liu?
Aye. Yes.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yes.
Commissioner Notch?
Yes.
Commissioner Michaud?
Michaud, yes.
Michaud, I'm sorry. Commissioner Oyakawa?
Yes, you're doing great today, by the way.
Commissioner Ruiz?
Yes.
Commissioner Sorter?
Yes.
Commissioner Tapapalian?
Yes.
And Commissioner Wilkins?
Yes.
On my count, that is a unanimous vote, and the motion carries. So we've adopted our goals and priorities for the year. Thank you all. Great job, Denise. First time out the gate, nailed it. And so as we move to close this item, I will ask that the slide for public comments for those participating online be shown, and anyone wishing to make public comments in the room, we'd ask you to line up behind the podium. Take it away, Kara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Chikowski. I'm from San Diego County, but here today I'm here as the liaison from SECO. So I just wanted to say kudos to you all for being intentional about your work and for thinking about your liaisons. And we're here, SECO is here every time you're here because we're interested in what you're doing. And to hear that you're interested in what we're doing is really encouraging. So thank you. Thank you for all you do. That's it.
Thank you. I don't see any more public comments in the room, and so we will switch to public comments online.
There are no callers at this time.
Okay. So we will close item 6, moving into item 7, general public comment. And so I'll ask that you display the slide for online public comments, and anyone in the room wishing to make general public comments, we'll ask you to line up at the podium now. Seeing no general public comments in the room, we will close public comments in the room. Are there any callers online?
There are no callers at this time.
Then we will close general public comment. So, commissioners, thank you for all of your input and engagement, and members of the public. we extend our appreciation to you as well as to our teammates from the department who are facilitating the meeting for us today. Before we adjourn, just a little bit of logistics. Each commissioner received a packet, I believe at lunch or this afternoon, that has forms from CDE. One is the travel reimbursement form. We would encourage everyone to begin filling in that out this evening with the information that you can right now, and conclude it tomorrow when we're in person to turn in. And again, we've worked with the department to try and facilitate the reimbursement process. Secondly, the last page in your packet is a requisition for business cards in support of the goals and priorities, or priorities and goals that we've just adopted, and I think our shared expectation that we are out spreading the word and making friends and partners. Thought it might be nice to be able to identify yourself with something semi-official looking. So working with the department to have business cards that identify you as an ACSE commissioner when you are attending different events and locations. And so please fill that out while we are here, and turn it in while we're here. No later than tomorrow, so we can make sure that, I'm not sure what the turnaround time is, but maybe the next time we are in person, they'll be ready for us to begin using. With that, we will begin tomorrow promptly at 9 a.m. for day 2. Yes, 9 a.m. at day 2. I would ask all commissioners to please be seated on the dais by 8:45-ish, just so that we have some leeway time, and we will begin promptly at 9 o'clock. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for a very productive day 1.